Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to everybody in the room. Welcome to anybody watching on the internet. I'm Chris Welch, the Program Director of the MSc in Space Studies here at the International Space University in Strasbourg, and I'm very pleased to open the proceedings this afternoon. For the last 6 months, our master's class has been working in 2 teams on 2 different projects. The well-known ISU 3 Eyes team project, International, Intercultural, Interdisciplinary. This afternoon you are going to see the results of all their hard work over that period. So without any more ado, I will hand over to the first team, TP Dragonfly. Thank you very much.
Professor Welch, faculty, staff, ISU staff, ladies and gentlemen, and those, of course, joining us online today, fellow students. Welcome to this afternoon's presentation by Dragonfly. My name is Robert Gavagis. I'm your host this afternoon for this presentation. Dragonfly is our name. It represents our team, which is made up of 20 motivated men and women from 10 countries. We have studied and worked as engineers, scientists, in business, as designers. We came to ISU to learn about space. Now we are ready to join the space industry to contribute to its future and its success. Our name Dragonfly was inspired by nature and in particular the flight mechanisms and characteristics of insects, for example bees and dragonflies in particular. The name Dragonfly was adopted to embody the project values and characteristics of such as flexibility, always evolving, and discipline. We have a website, and we invite you to visit that website later on. A few words about our presentation. It will consist of 4 parts. After introduction, in part 1, we will have question time. In question time, a group of ISU students are interested in starting up a drone company. They are represented by 3 of their members. They are here to find out if it is actually a good idea to enter the drones market. An expert panel from Dragonfly will provide answers to their questions. Following question time in part 3, we will be in a position to draw conclusions on what the expert panel have said. We will think about the next steps and what issues the startup candidates will have to consider should they decide to enter the drones market. And finally, in part 4, I will open the proceedings to questions from the audience here and online in our questions and answers session to clarify any additional points as necessary. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like everyone here and online after this presentation to go away feeling that they know a little more about drones. This is our take-home goal. So, what is a drone? That's the big question. Indeed, I have brought with me an example of a drone. To many, a drone is a quadcopter, which is what we have here. But the interesting thing is that a drone may mean different things to different people. For that reason, we went to interview a number of fellow students and others to see what they thought a drone was. Let's find out.
Hi, Anna.
Hi.
I have a question for you. Hi, my my name is Xiaoqian and I'm the reporter of Dragonfly. Since the beginning of our project, a lot of people have asked us, what is a drone? How do you define it? Well, before giving you our conclusion, I'm going to ask some other people and see what they think a drone is. Follow me. Alex, what is a drone?
A drone, you say? Aren't they like toys for children?
A UFO.
Something similar to an aircraft, something similar to a quadcopter, or it could be something which is remotely operated and works under the sea.
Balloon! To me, a drone is a piece of technology that a person on the ground controls, and it can go up and down and move around.
It's one of them things that buzzes around.
It's a flying machine that is commanded by someone who is not an
unmanned vehicle that can fly.
And they can be controlled remotely. Or I think they can also be autonomous.
Balloon.
The quadcopters, unmanned aerial vehicles.
Which were used for military applications in the past.
Okay.
And I guess now they use it for cool commercial applications.
Kind of like a little robot that goes into the sky that can take pictures and video.
Is balloon?
Is balloon.
Yeah, sure.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there was a bit of a mistimed sort of conversation there, but the essence is that different people think of a drone in different ways. And that was one of our challenges as part of this project, to actually understand for this project what a drone was and how we defined it. And we came up with this definition. We defined a drone as a reusable unmanned vehicle flown terrestrially or in space, controlled remotely, that's the important thing, using radio control, or flying autonomously using onboard flight plans, sensors, positioning systems, or controls. So for the duration of our project, that was our definition for a drone. Now, we know that the drones industry is experiencing significant change and advancement. The advancement and the change is actually driven by a number of factors. Drone technology, for instance, is one big factor that is resulting in new applications emerging. As a result of these new applications, market trends are also changing, and companies are consequently actually changing their own strategies and goals to meet new market demands. Legislation, however, is playing catch-up. Inadequate lawmaking appears to be a barrier to market development, and it needs to change, and we'll cover that further on in the presentation as part of our recommendations. Now, we know that given so much that's happening in the drones industry, and indeed drone capabilities rising, that it became essential that Dragonfly defined its intent clearly and clarified its mission during the course of the project. And I show you, after a number of iterations, Dragonfly's mission for this project was defined as follows, as you can see on the screen. It was to assess the potential benefits of using drones in terrestrial remote sensing. And terrestrial here is a significant point, as is remote sensing. But what is remote sensing? A definition for remote sensing that we applied is that it is the science of obtaining information about objects, geographical areas, or phenomena from a distance, typically from an aircraft or a satellite. And of course, a drone is an aircraft. We selected 3 areas to investigate, 3 areas of remote sensing. This was to investigate how well suited those areas were to the application of drones. Those areas were resource management, climate studies, and disaster management. it was felt that those areas of remote sensing were particularly susceptible to political, economical, and social factors, making them sensitive to public opinion and therefore of great significance. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now at the end of part 1. So through that introduction, I hope you have a reasonable understanding to the background of the project. As I promised earlier, next is question time. A group of students are interested in setting up a drone business, but they wish to find out more. They are represented here by 3 of their own, and they'll be asking 3 experts from Dragonfly about the whats and the ifs and the hows of the drones industry. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite the startup panel to join me on the stage. Anders Cavallini, Ms. Melissa Fernandez, Mr. Hatem Hussein. Please join me. Also, the expert panel, I'd like you to come on board too. Mr. Marco Scanlon, Ms. Linda Dow, Monsieur Theo Bidard. Hello. Now, startup panel, are you ready?
Yes, we are.
And expert panel, are you ready?
Yes, we are.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's question time.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for welcoming us here today. My name is Anders Cavallini, and my colleagues and I are recent graduate students from ISU, and we're thinking about getting into the drone market, particularly in remote sensing. Can someone explain to us justifications of remote sensing and how drones can help in that?
Sure. So typically there have been 3 main justifications for conducting remote sensing by companies or countries. The first of these is to obtain better information. Now, remote sensing information is used to manage population growth and research and resource centers. It's used to study the climate and a whole host of other things. And the importance of this information is typified by this graph behind me, where you can see that as a planet, we have been launching more and more Earth-observing satellites. Now, satellites are the basic Earth-observing tool because they can image the whole world quickly and completely. Where drones benefit remote sensing is that they can obtain much higher resolution information. So they could never replace satellites in imaging the whole world, but this high resolution information can open new fields for remote sensing. So as a platform, they are quite valuable. Now, the next justification given for engaging in remote sensing is to defend national interests, particularly to secure independent access to data. If you take a look at the graph behind me, which shows the countries that have launched the Earth-observing satellites I mentioned, you'll notice the major players in space, the United States, Russia, China, Europe, have launched a significant portion of these satellites. However, you'll notice quite a few Earth-observing satellites have been launched from South America, from different countries in Africa and Southeast Asia. And often these satellites provide lower resolution than what could be purchased off the market. But countries will tend to launch satellites and engage in Earth observation to secure an independent access to data. Now, as a platform, drones are beneficial in this as well. Because drones are much cheaper to develop than satellites, it makes it easier for developing countries to begin remote sensing. Again, they will not be able to image the whole Earth, but for a country to be able to cheaply generate interesting information about their country or smaller areas at a much lower price point and at a higher resolution is quite interesting. Now, the final justification given for remote sensing is the downstream benefit that it generates in a country. So if we take a country like Nigeria, who has been launching Earth-observing satellites, one of the major advantages is developing high-tech jobs in the country, in manufacturing and so on. And drones as a platform help here as well. Now, they're simpler than satellites, so there aren't the same manufacturing benefits that there are for satellites. However, the fact that they generate such high-resolution data means that there could be a data boom coming, and high-tech jobs in data management and processing could come as a result. So, to summarize, remote sensing happens to generate better information, to defend national interests, to secure national access to data, and for the downstream benefits that it generates. And drones as a platform fit very well into this. So it makes sense to explore them more in the field of remote sensing.
Thank you for this introduction, Mr. Scanlon. now it seems like we want to tackle a field basically been dictated by satellites for the last few decades. I'm wondering, basically, for the technical expert, Mr. Bedard, can you please explain the flight performance and the drone sizes that is currently available in the market?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. With the recent opening of drones to the general public, people tend to only consider the usual quadcopter, like the one we have in front of you. But in fact, drones can benefit of a very large variety of platforms. For example, here is the Global Hawk, the first well-known drone for military purpose that could be used for governmental purpose, like NASA here. It can fly at an altitude of 20 kilometers and can carry very large payload, up to 600 kilograms, which is huge. Currently in development, we have giant solar wings. So am I overreacting the giant word? Not really, because the wingspan is larger than the Airbus or Boeing airliners. So it's really, really huge, and they cover the surface with solar panels, so they can stock energy during the day to fly during the night. They can operate at a similar altitude of 20 kilometers, but they are designed to fly for days, weeks, if not months. But they can carry just a limited payload of, I think it's 40 kilograms. This one is Aquila. It's developed by Facebook on the initiative of Mark Zuckerberg. But Google has also its own drone called Solara 60. So big companies like that with Airbus are the major actors for the development. They are more likely to serve for communication purpose so far, but it could evolve in the future for remote sensing. On a smaller scales, we find back drones close to gliders operating at a couple of kilometers, and fixed wings and other multi-rotors, so mostly the quadcopter, as I said, but also the octocopter is really useful because of its stability. They can fly for a duration of a few hours to a few minutes, depending of the drones models. But the main point is that they can achieve a resolution in the order of centimeters, which is, as you may know, a very good point for the remote sensing. Also in development, we have hybrid systems that can take off and land vertically while flying horizontally, trying to mixing the assets of gliders and multi-rotors. So in definitive, we have different platforms for different scale and for different applications. Each of them has its own characteristic. Does that answer you?
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Bedard. Good afternoon. I'd like to question the legal expert. Now, you've spoken about specifications regarding altitude and weight. Are there any existing regulations?
Yes, so there are national regulations which determine how high a drone may fly. Looking at this image here, we see there are different regulations in place for 10 nations. Now, total weight restrictions of the drone, including the payload, are shown in this column here with respect to the type of use that the drone is used for. And so these restrictions are linked to the allowable altitude limits that the drone may fly at. Now, on the right-hand side of the chart here shows the type of regulations that are in effect, represented by the green circles, those regulations that are not in effect, represented by the red circles, and those that are currently not available as per current legislations as of January 2017, outlined by the specific nation. So, for an example, if you look at Germany, the altitude restriction for a drone is 30 meters, whereas in China, for example, the altitude restriction is 150 meters. So there's an extreme difference between the altitude differences among the different nations. And we thus see that even though drones are capable of flight of several kilometers, national restrictions prevent otherwise. And from my colleagues, Mr. Scanlon and Mr. Bidar, the national legislations are lagging behind the technological advancements. And I hope that answers your question a little bit.
It does, thank you. But I was also wondering about the categorization based on weight. Are there any prevailing classifications?
Yes, so drones are classified by the categories of recreational and non-recreational use according to their weight. Now we see for example, in Germany, different legislations apply according to the weight. In Germany, we see that drones that weigh less than 5 kilograms have much less restrictions than those that weigh greater than 25 kilograms. And a lot of the remote sensing drones actually do weigh more than 25 kilograms. And so they must be very careful when they register the drone under the law, as many countries have restrictions on how much a drone must weigh.
Thank you, Ms. Dow.
I just wanted to add a little conclusion that strict restrictions for altitude and weight limits do depend on the nation's regulation, as well as special permission is required for the special circumstances that are outside the limits of the drone regulations themselves.
Thank you for that. It seems, as always, regulation comes late after the new emerging technology and market. And this is basically what we're suffering with the Outer Space Treaty so far. Again, for the technical expert, Mr. Bedard, can you please compare to me the technical capabilities of the drones that you try to introduce with the satellites, the current satellites we have?
Well, Atem. Can I call you Atem?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, thanks. It will be very difficult to deny the use of satellites in remote sensing. The success of satellites stands in a few points, but cannot be handled by drones. We're talking of a large field of view of several kilometers, a lifetime mission of 10 to 15 years, and an easy data collection. Any image can be downloaded from any place on Earth without the need to deploy in team on site. Quite useful, right? And I'd like to add to that the resolution, one of the biggest advantages of drones so far, is getting better and better with satellite. A very high resolution satellite can perform a sub-meter panchromatic resolution now. The best one can achieve something close to 31 centimeter, if I remember well. So these satellites, they're just a few of them orbiting the Earth right now, and they're costly. But we can see that, yeah, the performance is here.
Thank you for that, but what about the mass limitation of the drone payload? Like you explained at the beginning that the Global Hawk is the biggest drone we have, and that's basically a spin-off from the military. Now, what happened to these kind of drones, which is the majority of the market, and this is the low cost that it's appealing for us? Can it have a proper payload, basically, to have whatever sensors we need?
Well, let me explain a little bit more about that. The drones is limited by the payload, that's a fact, I agree. But there's many manners to operate a drone. Classic optics, like cameras, is the main used kind of payload so far, either for mapping application or laser application, like the cinema, which is a growing market for drones. But action of drones does not stop here, no. Let's take the example of Sierra. This is a drone you can see here. Sierra is a fixed-wing medium-class drone that can fly at altitude of 3.6 kilometers with a range of about 1,000 kilometers. Sierra has accomplished mission in the Arctic to find and measure some of the oldest ice sheets with the help of a synthetic aperture radar, an active imager that is mostly used into satellites and aircraft, traditional aircraft solutions so far. But now it's applicable to drones. On the same way, LiDAR technology, which stands for Light Detection and Ranging, a study analyzing the Hurricane Katrina of 2005 have shown that this kind of data could really help the rescue team on site and make the emergency response faster by 35%. It's huge. There's a real need for this technology now. And once again, you could add this to the drones. So if I had the thermal cameras that could be used, for example, to monitor the dissipation of power lines, you can see that the action of drone is not as limited as it thought now. So just to conclude our little discussion, yes, satellites are a very excellent platform, of course, for remote sensing, and they're getting better and better, even if they are just a limited capacity right now with a few very high resolution satellites to rivalize with drones. But we can see that drones have some benefit too. Yeah, they can have a lot of platform, a lot of payloads integrated to the platform now.
Thank you for that.
Wow, I mean, the resolution is staggering. But it's also a bit concerning because who knows what the drones may film or what data they may publish. So my question really is, in the same fashion as drone regulations, are there, do various countries have their own interpretation of the data they restrict? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, so to answer your question, Melissa, let's have a look again back at this chart. We see here the privacy column chart, which addresses whether data protection is addressed in the nation or whether they are not addressed at all. For example, looking at Germany, they put an emphasis on their privacy data protection. However, in countries like France and Japan, they do not address this issue at all. So, for example, in Germany, in fact, in order for a drone to capture surveillance over a non-public area, they have to have consent by all the parties that are being surveyed. And so we see here that privacy is a big issue for drones. And in addition, with the European Union, they are able to regulate the data protection by the use of a copyright law. And though this copyright law may not be adequate for remote sensing data, the European Union has enhanced their legislations in order to include a sort of sui generis right where they're able to borrow principles from different legislations or analogous legislations in order to cover this data protection. Now, US Supreme Court Justice, I think he's calling right now, his name is J.M. Harlan, and what he said is that there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. And so you have to consider, what is this reasonable expectation of privacy anyways? If you're going to a public area, really, I think I need to answer the call. So I think he's really pressing on the matter that if you're in a public area such as parks and streets, then this reasonable expectation of privacy does not exist, and therefore a person cannot claim invasion of that privacy itself. Now, I want to show you a video that went viral that relates to why privacy and data protection should be a concern.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, Jashan.
You look so mad.
Yeah. I was taking a shower in the washroom and this drone came in and spied on me.
What?
And then I slipped and fell.
Oh my god, what are we going to do with it?
I'm gonna find out who did this and I'm gonna sue them.
So we see here in that video that even though Jason was in a public area, the drone invaded his privacy.
Now, yes, that video was very interesting. You mentioned this term, reasonable expectation of privacy. I don't quite understand what you mean by that.
So what I mean by reasonable expectation of privacy is that drones are not being monitored as much as they should be. In fact, international regulations that are currently in place, they don't identify as much how much drones should be monitored. And so we find that, for example, when you're using your GPS technology on your phones, you tend to allow Google, for example, to know where you are in terms of your location in order to identify the direction. So in a click of a button, you're giving up your privacy rights in order to help you find out where you are. And we find nowadays that with technology progressing, privacy demands are decreasing, and we want to make sure that people understand about what they are giving up and that they shouldn't give up more than they have to.
And are there any restrictions on manufacturing a drone?
Yes. So in fact, there exists this international organization for standardization known as the ISO. And what they do is that they develop international guidelines for how to manufacture different types of products. However, there is no standards or guidelines that currently exist for drones, but we are hoping that in the near future that drone manufacturers would have some sort of guidelines to follow in order to ensure that specific quality is available before drones are being sold in the market. And so with this, I would like to conclude that some countries, they do put restrictions on data protection and privacy regulations, while others still need to develop them. And there is a lack of a unified legal framework for drone manufacturing and operations. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Ms. Dow.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ms. Dow. I think we could probably get around regulations if need be. But can you tell me a little bit more about resource management and how drones can be used in that field?
Absolutely. So resource management is actually predicted to be the most important field for drones in the future. If you take a look at this survey done by Markets and Markets, it shows that in the next 10 years, most commercial drones sold will be used in agriculture. So we really see this, especially smart farming, but resource management in general, as the main field for drone usage. So Mr. Badar will talk to you a bit about the technical capabilities of drones in this field, and then I'll return to present the business standpoint.
Thank you, Marco. So, drones, sorry. Yeah, give me yours. Here. Oh, it's blocked.
Might be lagging.
Yeah, I need a picture actually.
Serious?
I think the whole thing was frozen.
Sorry for technical problem.
It's frozen, like.
Yeah, it's frozen.
We can come back later if you guys aren't prepared for
No, no, please stay. It's just, you know, small. Can we restart the computer, maybe?
Yeah.
Where is this fast?
Maybe in the meantime you can talk about the drone.
Ladies and gentlemen, whilst the technical problem is being dealt with, are there any particular questions so far that are troubling you? Maybe you'd like to put them to our panel here. Is there anyone here who would like to know about any issues that have been covered thus far? If there aren't, I have a question actually to the panel. Theo,
yeah.
These three people are interested in setting up a business. Is there anything you can actually say to them at this stage, based on what we've covered so far, that should put them off from setting up a business in the drones industry?
Well, that's an interesting question, Robert. Yeah, as we will see about the technological capacity of drones, you will see that it may evolve a lot in the future, in the near future. So there's some trends we have to look at closely, which are something like power management. Is it okay? Yeah. Well,
Finish that, yes, please.
I think we'll talk a little bit later about future trends anyway, so I think I will continue our point. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So yeah, as I said, resource management is an area that really benefits from the excellent resolution of drones. So here you have a vineyard portion photographed with 3 different platforms. There's a satellite, an aircraft, and a drones. So do I really need to tell you what image is linked to what platforms? As you may have guessed, the first image is from the satellite, the second is from the aircraft, the third is from the drone, sorry. The last one is the filtering process of the drone's image. So what do we see here is that even with the aircraft, which already operate at low altitude, it's difficult to count the number of rows of the vineyard portion. And it's simply impossible in this very example with the first picture, which is just a bunch of pixels. So this task can only be performed with the drone due to the excellent resolution. Also, with a filtering process, we can get a binary images. So the whole process can be automated with computers, making the thing really easy to use. Another really good aspect I want to tell you about resource management drone is the accessibility of drones. The construction, the maintenance, the operation of drones does not require for long formation and can be achieved at low cost. Then it's a good solution for community, either for agriculture, as you said, Marco, but also for forestry, for example. And I think I will let you, Marco, talk about the tech business advantage of resources.
Thank you, Mr. Bedard. So, as my colleague pointed out, drones are really revolutionary in the field of agriculture and smart farming in particular. So, Dragonfly decided to examine the smart farming market. And so this survey comes from American farmers, and one thing that's interesting to note is that since the 90s, over 50% of American farmers use some form of satellite imagery for smart farming, whether it be GIS overlay, whether it be direct satellite imagery. what we found really interesting is the fact that drones have been in this survey just 1 year, and yet they're viewed as a very disruptive technology because of their price point and the benefits they can cause. And these benefits go beyond just imaging and counting rows and go towards smarter applications to save water, to save fertilizers and pesticides. But just on imaging, taking a look at seeing how many people use satellite imagery already, we decided to, it makes you wonder, maybe satellites have advantages, and of course they do, because satellites take much wider images. So at some point, satellites become a more cost-effective solution. So to answer this, we looked at crossover studies showing how much it would cost to survey something by satellite, by aircraft, or by drone. And so this study comes from 2014 and shows a crossover point just around 10 hectares. However, in the last 2 years, this point has been moving much further to the right as drone technology advances. But the fact of the matter is that in bigger countries with larger farms, satellites will always be more advantageous because the data quantity that would be generated by drones is just too much to process and to use usefully. But for smaller farms, there's a real benefit to using drones for remote sensing. And this really stands out in the developing world. For example, India, where the average farm size is less than 1 hectare, you can really see the advantage of developing drone platforms. And as Mr. Bedard pointed out, since they're easy to buy and maintain, it would be very feasible for a community of farmers to own and operate a drone to start smart farming around the world. Now, we've talked a lot about agriculture and smart farming and resource management because this is one field where satellites have generally played a big role, as I showed you before. However, there are other fields where drones will open that satellites can never play a role in. So this is a survey talking about using drones for stockpile management. So for imaging equipment and materials on a work site. And this is a field where drones can play where satellites never could. And as you can see here, they're quite more efficient than using human operators or aircraft-based operators to manage stockpiles and resources. And this is because they give a resolution that is usable at these levels, whereas satellite imagery, even at 31 centimeter resolution, isn't beneficial in imaging stockpiles. So we can see a lot of fields where drones are really just creating new fields that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Beyond stockpile management, you see fields like contour mapping, so measuring the changes in elevation for an open-air mine, where drones can offer hyper-precise readings and really open new fields that would never be attainable by satellites. So just to summarize the benefits of drones, drones obviously have huge benefits in smart farming, but particularly for smaller farms. And beyond agriculture, in resource management, there are a whole host of new fields that are being opened by the fact that drones are a cheap, easy platform with very high resolution. So there is a huge market potential in the field of resource management.
Thank you for that thorough answer, Mr. Scanlon and Mr. Bedard. I have a question about climate studies. Can drones help in climate studies?
Well, drones are very beneficial in climate studies due to the fact that they can deploy quickly and easily and don't need a flight plan to do so, at least at lower altitudes. Now, to be able to fully answer this, we decided to look at the weather forecasting market. And as you can see, the weather forecasting market is huge. Over 3 billion, should be attaining 4 billion very soon. Now, this is obviously dominated by satellites because they can image the whole globe and take a lot of readings. But drones as a system are very beneficial here. Because they can take really precise readings in small areas, they are starting to be used more and more for local weather forecasts, which looking at this and looking at the technical advantages that drones have over aircraft or satellites, you can see how it would make sense to integrate them into GEOS, into the Global Earth Observation System. Now, looking at this, we decided to look more into quantifying exactly what benefit drones could have. So this study comes from weather-related accidents in Europe alone. And as you can see, our current model cuts down on the overall impact of these weather-related accidents to the tune of something like 3 billion euros a year. However, there's still room for improvement of over 300 million euros a year, and drones could help here by improving our weather forecast with their accuracy and the high frequency at which they can obtain data. Now, beyond stuff like the climate, drones have specific benefits that neither satellites or aircraft can do, and one very notable example is in studying volcanoes. So volcano plumes are opaque to satellite imagery, and they're dangerous for human operators in an aircraft. However, drones have been used to take measurements in volcanoes and help generate information. Now, to quantify this information is difficult at the base, but the impact of a better knowledge of volcanic activity would be huge in preventing something like the 2011 volcanic eruption in Iceland, or better managing it. And that cost billions of dollars to a whole variety of fields, from tourism in Europe to farming in North Africa. So really, to summarize, drones are beneficial in studying the climate. Of course, never to replace satellites, but because they can provide precise local measurements, they would be of great benefit to the global Earth observation system. And they offer particular benefits in acquiring data from inhospitable areas. So we really see drones as beneficial in this field.
Thank you for that. You mentioned the Icelandic volcano disaster, which actually got me thinking, could drones be useful in remote sensing for disaster management?
Let me answer that, yeah. What do we know right now is that satellite images for disaster management could be processed within 48 hours, 2 days. It's simply too much. The first 8 hours are the more critical. On the other hand, drones are flexible. Cloud cover doesn't affect the observation. As mentioned my colleague, they can access very difficult zones as canyons, volcanoes, or even smaller structures like bridges or buildings. While the satellite is constrained to a fixed trajectory and a revisit time fluctuating between a few hours to a few days, depending on the orbit, the satellite can be sent, the drone, can be sent to a precise location as many times as needed. So due to this characteristic, the flexibility, we can see that drones is a good solution for emergency situations. Let's take the example of a flood, an earthquake or fire. Drone can be deployed, starting to map the area. These data are sent to the rescue team underground, so they can evaluate the risk of certain zone, identify the obstacles, prepare a path to reach strategic area. These are really helpful. And this cannot be handled by satellite, but only by drone. So in a sense, drone can replace satellite for emergency situation, for disaster management. Maybe I'm overreacting here. Everything is not black and white like this, because satellite provide very precious data for risk assessment and risk reduction, which is useful before and after a disaster. And others can say also that drones doesn't suffer from the cloud cover, that's right, but they are still susceptible to fog, heavy rain, and wind. We have seen that the wind speed must be lower than 25 to 15 km per hour in order to have good imagery. But still, yeah, flexibility is a good answer for emergency situation.
Just to add some examples on this point, one very famous example where drone imagery was used for a disaster was in Nepal in 2015, where an earthquake caused a massive amount of devastation, and cloud cover meant that no satellite imagery could be taken for days after the disaster. So drones were successfully used to take images and to aid the repair effort. And so that means drones will help save people, will help mitigate the cost of disaster. And this is very important, more than just for the loss of infrastructure, but by affecting people's lives, you affect the next harvest. You have huge downstream effects on a country. So this earthquake cost Nepal over 30% of their GDP. And to be able to better manage a disaster site is hugely beneficial, beyond human life onto economic benefits and everything. So drones are really beneficial, and this is one case where they did help. In a particular economic standpoint, drones are hugely beneficial for insurance companies. And that's because insurance companies need to be able to find out quickly what losses they will have to cover to help manage their finances. And drones are very beneficial for this because they can be deployed quickly and provide very high resolution data. And so one example of where this happened in real life was in the Tianjin port disaster in August of 2015, where the short is an explosion happened at the port. The plumes covered the area for satellite imagery for a period, and people weren't allowed on the scene. So insurance companies turned to drones to take images. Now these images were compared with previous satellite imagery to measure the extent of the damages and to find out what level had to be repaid by the insurance companies. So to summarize, as Mr. Bedard pointed out, drones are hugely beneficial in disaster areas because they allow for very fast response, which can mitigate the effects of a disaster and help find survivors in those critical first 8 hours. And secondly, and very importantly, For the insurance companies, drones are of huge importance because they can provide these images at very high resolution and very quickly and help facilitate future planning.
Thank you for that. You know, like you reminded me last year when I was in Nepal trying to lose some weight by hiking the Himalayas. And I remember we've seen the sun only 2 days in 2 weeks. That region with the tropical weather is mostly cloudy. So I'm sure satellites had some challenges to take any disaster management photos at that time. Now, to be honest, I already could see the potential of drones as a rival for satellites. But we want to enter the market for a long term. Like, so far you mentioned that some of the, or majority of the drones goes from hours to minutes. And this is a concern. Like, we cannot do remote sensing with minutes. We need more. So can you please tell me, Mr. Bedard, what kind of emerging technical capabilities that might improve this limitation that drones have?
Well, thank you for that question. Dragonfly has assessed 6 main technological and business trends that are affecting drones on this slide. Among them, 3 of them, power management, the level of autonomy, and new materials and design are considered as the main one. So I'd like to tell you how they can affect drone in the next 5, 10, 20 years. So as you have mentioned, the flight duration is one of the main constraints right now for the drones. Both the power source and the power management can try to improve this aspect. Solar panels, as we have seen with the giant solar wing at the beginning of this presentation, are already assisting drones to perform long record for flight duration. I should have mentioned that at the beginning, that the world record is held by Airbus with 336 hours of flight with no landing. That's 2 weeks. It's impressive, right? So imagine now this, the enhancement of solar panels and their miniaturization, so we can integrate them better to smaller, like this quadcopter. That will be very beneficial. On the other side, batteries technology are also improving their efficiency, which is measured in watt per kilogram most of the time. Batteries are driving other huge markets as electric cars or smartphone, laptop with lithium batteries you're all using right now. So drones can really benefit to this aspect too, and we can expect really good performance for that. The latest nano-based battery is really interesting because it will decrease the time of recharging to 70% just by 2 minutes. So imagine the application, it will be really better. The autonomy. The autonomy deals with 3 aspects as in this graph: the environmental difficulty, the human interface, and the mission complexity. Being able to improve the sensors or the algorithm will allow to decrease the need of a human operators, and then increase the reliability or the complexity achievable, and a better understanding of the surrounding environment. So I have an example that comes in mind about the collision system, which is not up to date right now, not yet. Being able to enhance the algorithm and the artificial intelligence for that will allow to develop a lot of application. Imagine working with network of drones, swarming formation. That will be crazy. And finally, future materials and design. Engineers working hard on that to develop new design, new process for the manufacturing and disposal of drones, using like lightweight materials, the famous 3D printing technology, or optimized artificial intelligence designs. So both all of these aspects will assist to increase the performance of drones, the global performances, the flight duration also, but also to reduce the cost and the difficulty of manufacturing. So this field is interesting both for technical reasons and business reasons. So to summarize, the future drone may look very different, but one thing is sure is that the performance will be far better than now. And I'd like to add to that the miniaturization of sensors like cameras and things, and you could be sure that you have to keep an eye on these trends, because yeah, something is up to it.
Thank you, Mr. Bedard. So from what I understand, there seems to be great advancements in drone technology. It's amazing. But how do you see us progressing with drone legislation?
That is a great question and also a tough one, Melissa. If you don't mind, can I take some look at my paperwork here?
Sure, take your time.
All right. So let's see. Drones, legislations, no legislations. Yeah, sorry. There is no actual clear question to no answer to your question. We see that drone legislations lack uniformity and structure. For example, the international legislations that we have currently, which are in the infant stages, they're not really consistent. We can see here that the definitions for the terms of recreational, commercial, public, private, these are not consistent between the different nations, whether they mean that the drones are owned by state authorities, private citizens, private companies, or whether they are used for hobbies, research, or even for business purposes. There's no consistent answer between the different nations. And so what is consistent, though, is the fact that drones have certain areas where they're restricted to flying at. And these include places such as hospitals, airports, military bases, nuclear power plants, and over other crowded areas themselves.
You mentioned this gap in this administration and technology. Can you tell me some more about it?
Yes, so there's a gap, a huge gap, that exists between the legislations and the current technologies. And even though that this gap exists, we're hoping that once policymakers are aware, then they will be able to progress towards bridging the gap together. And this main gap is primarily due to the fact that drones are not being monitored enough as much as they should be, as I've said before. And the reason that this may be the case is that monitoring a drone is very important for you to understand how the drones are being used, and in order to ensure its reliability and safety, we want to make sure that we know what the drones are being used for.
On that note, you're aware that there exists concern amongst the public. You know, people are fearful of drones.
Yes, unfortunately, that is the case. So people are fearful of drones mainly because there doesn't really exist this international regulatory framework for drones. And because of this, people are afraid on aspects such as surveillance, safety, signal interceptions, and other aspects that could relate to the drone causing harm to the environment itself.
And finally, do you think that the legislators are progressing towards any sort of comprehensive legislation?
Well, currently, I do believe that drones are not progressing, drone legislations are not progressing as fast as they should be in accordance to the technological advancements as what we have. I want to bring forth a concern about safety, for example, and we see here that there are a lot of different safety factors with respect to the drone. So there could be a malfunction or failure of the flight control system resulting in a drone flyaway. There could be inability of the remote pilot to perform their duties due to injury or illness. There could be in-flight fires, and there could be all these other damages as well, as I said, to the environment caused by a drone. I want to emphasize this point by taking a look at this video where safety was a concern by the use of a drone.
Sam, what happened to your arm?
Well, I had a bit of an accident. I was cycling on my bike and a small drone came and hit me in the face and it caused me to crash.
Oh my god, what are you going to do with it?
I'm not really sure. It raises some pretty interesting insurance questions. Like, for instance, was it the 6-year-old kid who was operating the drone? Is it his fault? Is it his parents' fault? Or is it the company that made the software to automate the drone flight?
So we see here that drone safety is quite important, and especially in order to mitigate such safety concerns, then drone pilots should have the proper certifications in order to properly operate the drone itself.
Now, in the same instance as the video, what do you think happens when a drone crashes? Sam, spoke about insurance. Is the drone insured?
Well, the drone insurance market is still in its formative stages. We see that, for example, drone manufacturers who who manufacture the drone, they need to undergo specific testings before the drone is sold into the market. And these testings will help insurance companies ensure that the drone that is being sold has the proper qualities to prevent such safety concerns. We also see that, sorry, keep going.
One last question, Ms.
Yes.
Dow. How do you feel we can reduce the number of accidents caused by drones?
I believe that as long as drones fly within the visual line of sight and during the daytime, it is important that drones can mitigate the dangers of collisions, for example. Although this doesn't necessarily happen often because the drone regulations currently are quite flexible. We see this in the case of the company Amazon in the United Kingdom, where they had one pilot control multiple autonomous drones at once without the visual line of sight. And so this brings up the concern, okay, these legislations are made, but they're flexible, and in order to make them more strengthened and rigid, we have to develop or start developing harmonized international regulatory frameworks that the drone operators can follow as in unison. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Dow.
So with that, we were wondering whether you had any further questions or concerns?
Personally, I don't have any questions. What about you guys? Okay, well, we don't have any questions.
Thank you for asking questions to us. I would now like to invite back Mr. Vargas to give the final concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, expert panel, and of course, the questioners. So, what is the conclusion from that question time debate? As we know, drones are versatile and capable. They are technologically advanced. Drones are capable of performing remote sensing in many fields. They are attracting investment by the business community, and that investment is increasing, in fact. Use of drones in precision agriculture, forestry, and mining improves crop yields. It protects forests against fire and in disaster management, the combined use of satellites and drones can improve the effectiveness and efficiency of search and rescue missions. In climate studies, drones and satellites together can assess global warming, survey drought-stricken areas and the damages to them, and check on the weather. The drone capabilities actually extend to drones working on their own too, but in niche areas. For example, local weather forecasting is one area. In situ information platforms, for example, again, in case of disaster-struck areas, is another area of expertise for drones. As my colleagues stated earlier, drones can be integrated into GEOS, the Global Earth. Advances in drone propulsion methods and batteries extend load carrying capability and range. New materials and manufacturing methods will lead to lower drone costs, and of course that will ultimately expand the market or directly lead to its expansion. Drones are less complex than satellites. That means smaller economies can develop their own high-tech industries based on drones. Drones are of particular interest to insurance companies, as we heard earlier. They can be deployed rapidly to assess damage And the data from those assessments can be used to, in fact, estimate the cost of repair and recovery. But drones, as we saw in Sam's case, can hurt too. But we need regulation, good regulation, to make it possible for the industry to grow and grow healthily. Regulation has to cover liability and accountability. Regulation has to protect the public and their property. So, what are our recommendations? We understand that regulation is playing catch-up, not just at national level, but also international level. Our research indicated that there is no international regulation for drones, unlike civil aviation and aircraft. We therefore recommend that International Civil Aviation Organization becomes the champion of internationalizing drones regulation and become its administrator. Regulatory standards at national level should also become more consistent across countries. They are not at the moment. Piloting, again, as we saw in the video, is an issue, and therefore stricter controls and training should be imposed on drone operators. We also recommend that drone applications in search and rescue missions should be extended and their capabilities really tested. We know that in disaster areas, the infrastructure is affected. Therefore, having access to power, to water, to other resources is essential, and drones have to operate in those conditions. That is a challenge. We also said that drones could be, and therefore, in our view, should be integrated into GEOS. Through better management, there are cost savings potential, particularly when it applies to the weather, and through better weather forecasting at local level, accidents can be reduced. If accidents are reduced, then the cost of those accidents could also be reduced. There are estimates that accidents cost £340 million a year. Even a 10%, 20% of that can be quite useful. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings our presentation to its end. Apologies with a couple of technical issues there, but I hope we have given you the message in terms of what drones are capable of doing. Before I take us through to question time, second part, where the opportunity is open to ask general questions, I'd like to thank the following people who have been involved in the project: members of the faculty and staff, and teaching assistants, of course. And in our videos, the following people appeared. We also had some music that we enjoyed by Pink Panther. So, here are our references. There are various books we can refer you to if you are interested. But at this point in time, I'd like to invite our expert panel to the stage and throw open the floor to questions. Thank you very much indeed. May I suggest that all questions are addressed through to me, and then I will direct the questions to the expert panel for replies. Thank you. Yes, we have. There's one here. So, first question, please.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for a very entertaining presentation. I don't know what happened to Jason in the shower. I'm not sure I want to speculate. But I will remember it anyway. First question is actually from President Peters, who's not here, but who's been watching online, and he's emailed this question in. And he says, the resolution of satellite images in remote sensing is restricted in many countries. Is this not then an unfair competitive advantage for drones, which don't appear to have any resolution limitation?
So I'm assuming that the advantage is against satellites. Is that right?
Yes, advantage of drones against satellites.
Against satellites. Expert panel, who would like to answer this? Marco?
I can. As pointed out by my colleague, Ms. Dow, regulations tend to lag behind technology a little. And it's right in some cases that there's an unfair advantage to drones. But as drones become used more and more commercially, you'll see these regulations start being put into place. And the other thing to remember is that regulations are often modified for satellites. So if you take a look at 5-10 years ago, the minimum resolution allowed by satellites commercially was 50 centimeters, and now it's 31 because the new worldview was able to take 31 centimeter resolution. So regulations will often change based on technology, and we've seen satellites push for lower resolutions and obtain it, because at present the resolution is 31 centimeters instead of 50. And you'll start seeing this legislation applied to drones as they become used more and more commercially. But you have to remember that satellites are imaging the whole world, so there are privacy concerns. Whereas drones are, when they're being used commercially, they're only imaging what they're told to image. So some of these privacy concerns aren't the same.
Okay, thank you. I have another question from the internet, this time from Steve Brody, ISU Vice President, who's been watching from the USA. And it's about the use of drones for natural disasters. Has the team considered any application of drones to help with any of the life cycle, in inverted commas, phases of tornadoes? From formation prediction, likely path of damage, degree of damage, and etc. And if there is coverage of that, what is it? And if it's a new idea, do any of the team members have any thoughts?
Theo, is that something you may want to respond to?
The report of the TPs were detailed at the presentation right now, and yeah, we have considered a lot of applications considered for disaster management, and I guess.
Sorry.
No, maintenant? Yeah.
So, okay, I'll try to do that. So, as I said, yeah, the report is more detailed about the disaster management. It was very difficult to put all the information in this presentation due to the time limitation. But yeah, there's a lot of application considered for drone for disaster management. And it's not only about remote sensing. Sometimes it's also about delivering goods or products, something obvious that can do drone satellites. Is that answer the question, partially?
It was about tornadoes.
Tornadoes, okay. Well, I guess tornado is a big issue for the... Just let you do...
Carry on, please. And
I'm sorry.
Hand over to Mark.
Well, to the emergency situation, tornado, of course, we can send a drone to the tornado in front of the tornado. But just after the tornado, then I think drones can map the area, as I said, to help a lot with all the debris and identify the obstacle to reach to prepare a path for the rescue team, for example. Marco, do you want to add something? No.
Thank you. Can we have the next question, please?
Okay. First of all, I'd like to commend the team on their hard work, both in the presentation and leading up to this. It was quite an entertaining presentation. I have a couple of questions, as always. The
the first one, you've touched on this briefly, but I'd like you to expand on this. You make a recommendation for strict regulation of piloting of drones, but I suspect the time has passed for that. When you can go down to the supermarket and buy a drone and fly it, how would you regulate people piloting these drones? So how would you imagine this recommendation taking effect?
Linda, would you like to take that?
Yeah, so to answer your question, there are currently different legislations that pertain to the type of drone and the drone use. So drones, as we saw from the graph before, they are separated or categorized based on their weight of the payload and how high they can fly. So based on this, in order, each person who uses a drone may need to register their drone depending on the weight. So drones weighing less than 5 kilograms in Germany, they don't actually need to register their drones. And so without registration, then that means you may not actually require this pilot certification, which brings up the safety issue. However, with payloads that are increasingly becoming higher, then that increases the weight restriction, and therefore these bigger drones need to be registered by the state authority, and then when they are registered, more restrictions apply where the pilot itself has to get certified under the state regulations themselves.
Okay, but we'll take this a little bit further if we can.
Yeah.
So say I live in a country where I have to register a drone if it weighs more than 5 kilos.
Yes.
Okay. And I buy a 4 kilo drone.
Okay.
Or I buy 2 of them and I fly them at once. Okay. I can do equal or more damage than would be required or is possible with one that would break the law for legislation. So how would you deal with a situation like that?
So this is why we want to recommend that all drones, despite the purpose of use, are to be registered under their state authority, and that way the state itself has control over what drones are currently being used. And to answer your question specifically with the 2 drones that weigh a total of 4 kilograms, then currently as then they don't need to register their drones, and this brings up that safety issue again. And so we want to try to mitigate it, which is why we're proposing that all drones, regardless of use or the weight, to be registered, and the pilots have certifications in order to operate them.
Okay. Are you not concerned that over legislation or over regulation would stifle potential applications or innovation?
Well, we're in the stages where the drone technology are advancing much faster than the legislations themselves. So the legislations are, when I say the infant stages, it means there's a lot of gaps and loopholes, and there's a lot of questions that are unanswered or unavailable to us for those in order to operate a drone. However, right now, our main concern is not that it will be over-legislated, but our concern is that it's under-legislated, and this is why we need to make an action to have different nations work together and make a consistent legal regulation in place so that international drone operators understand how they may fly a drone in different countries, for example.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Daniela.
Yes. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very, very. Have also a couple of questions linked to regulations. So you mentioned that the regulation should become more consistent across the countries.
Yes.
So if we go on your slide 24, I think, where you have a regulation framework.
Yeah, Robert, do you mind?
24, slide number 24. Okay, so there you mention that we have a different regulations for different countries. If we take exemplar like France and Germany, and we are like now in Strasbourg and we fly our drone,
yes,
we can see that in France I cannot fly over the 30 meters.
Yes.
So, but I can fly in Germany. What's happened if the German drone come to France? How you will actually control that?
Robert, if 24, please. So to start off with answering your question about border control, we haven't really looked into the fact of drones crossing different borders, but the way that's only because there are no current legislations that exist. So if a France drone flies over to Germany, you can has a potentiality that they're altitude because they're in Germany, but we do make sure that the drone that is coming from France has to be registered under Germany's state authority. So Germany has to know that this France drone is coming over in order to fly there. Now, in terms of the different altitude,
on the 30 slides as well. Okay, 24. We can keep going. It's not the good one. Maybe 23. Yeah, this one. Sorry.
Right, so the France regulations have an altitude of 150, whereas Germany is only 30. So it's kind of the reverse of what you have asked, where if a German drone then flies to France, they can fly at a higher altitude. However, France needs to know if this drone is coming. If not, and they identify this as an unknown drone, then that can cause issues for the state authority. We also see that even though the altitude restrictions are in place, sometimes special permission can be granted by the government depending on the specific use of the operation of the drone.
Okay.
Just on that topic, this is something that's interesting because civil aviation went through the same issues years ago, and which is why there are now more or less standards in different areas of the world that take care of this problem. And the fact of the matter, as my colleague pointed out, is that there are too many different independent regulations, and that makes something like crossing border a huge issue. So by developing more consistent multinational or international regulations, you won't have these problems anymore. And that's something that we really see as missing from the drone field. And I mean, if you take civil aviation as you see that it should happen. It just hasn't happened yet, and the technology has been growing for the last several years.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is also linked to the same slide and regulations. In the case of Russia, when we don't have enough information regarding to altitude, and if we have a look, they are allowed any drone which is more 250 grams. In this case, how we will actually cooperate with their neighbors?
It's not on. Oh yeah, it is. Okay. So with Russia, they are currently trying to follow along with the legislations that are developed by other nations. For example, we recently saw in the news in 2016 that Russia is trying to incorporate the laws that the U.S. has set out that, in relation to the drones. Now, in regards to their current legislations, the reason there isn't much legislations in place for Russia, but they plan on, as drones are being used more often, they plan on trying to incorporate the legislations as done by other countries that have developed legislations in place.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation, which was interesting and broad enough already. But I have a few questions and remarks. You were talking essentially about three main domains of application of threat in terms of drones, in terms of remote sensing, disaster management. Okay. For disaster management, Mr. Bidau, actually, you mentioned that today you get just feedback from satellites after 48 hours. Which is not the case, because with this, with the disaster management charter, you can expect to get any satellite flying above the place that you want to get, and getting image in less than 6 hours, and CERTIT is doing that now. So, can you comment on this?
Yeah. Even if the regulation allows this. Accessibility, fast accessibility. We have seen, what was the company again, Marco, do you remember? The one that they give a lecture.
CERTIT?
Yeah,
CERTIT.
But the process could take a long time, sometime. And
Sometimes,
48 hours
but
was
in
the
general,
average.
they are focusing on 6 hours. They want to try to get in 6 hours. Okay.
Even 6 hours is already a lot when it comes to emergency management. But
No, I agree with you.
the
but
average data we had was about 2 days to provide
Okay.
good imagery of disaster.
Okay. You didn't talk too much about other applications like the Amazon delivery, things like this. Do you believe that it is a real market for the future?
I can add a word if you want, but Marco. Okay, first of all, I'd like to say that technically this is already this is a big challenge. As I mentioned, with the T-system collision that are not up to date right now, there's still a lot of work to do. So it could, I think, develop a challenge, a big market. Marco will add something about that, but technically it's still, I think, a problem. And you have seen that with the regulation, it's also more challenging. So.
For some of these new markets, and now using drones for delivery was outside of our scope, which is why we didn't address Amazon much more than passing, and why we very briefly, when we talk about disaster management, talked about how drones could also deliver medicine or provide a cell phone broadcast. But when you take something like Amazon's delivery platform, there's really there are legal issues to deal with. Right now, it's only being used in less urban areas. You can imagine that flying a multitude of drones in urban areas might become chaotic. And, it seems at the moment more like a publicity stunt than a long-term future. It's possible that it progresses, but you need a lot of technological advancement and a lot of legalization for it to happen. And right now, we're nowhere close to that. So whether I think or not it's plausible in the near or far future, there are at least a lot of things stopping you from using drones for delivery, such as line of sight, such as certified pilots, flying in cities and collision avoidance. So it's really, we're quite far away from doing that on a wide scale.
Okay, thank you. And it's more or less what I believe also. And the last remark is the following. Well, the drone is a very new technology, very easy to get, not cheap at all. So there is some threat, of course, for instance, having terrorists using it for damaging, and so how to try to limit the use of this kind of platforms in that circumstances.
Okay. When it comes to technology, there's no consistent way of holding it out of the wrong hands. And you see this with small firearms or explosives or chemical weaponry or everything. And of course, drones can be used to hold payloads, and those payloads could be whatever you put on them. So there's no real way to come out with technology and say, we don't want some people to get this technology. The way we do right now is through legislation. And so we've already pointed out that legislation isn't very normalized and that it's very easy to buy drones. And I think my colleague Ms. Dow pointed out that we're pushing for a bit stricter regulation. Of course, as Mr. Osborne mentioned, you have to be careful not to stymie the market. But we are pushing for at least greater regulation, and it's the best way to prevent these things getting into the wrong hands. But other than that, there's no perfect solution, as we've seen with a whole host of other more dangerous technologies. And Mr. Bedard has a comment as well.
Yeah, so as said, Marco is no very good solution right now, but we start to see some existing solution that in some trends. Some companies are developing some jamming system, for example, so that can stop drones whenever it's flying into a zone where it's restrained or something. But it's really at the beginning. It's very, I think it's not ready yet.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, team Dragonfly. One of the great compliments that a faculty member can give you is that they really enjoyed your presentation, and I certainly did. Now, I just wanted to ask you one question, if I may, about the usefulness of team projects from the point of view of entrepreneurship. Has this team project inspired any of you to think about starting your own company or pursue postgraduate study in this field?
I think I could answer that question, Professor.
In terms of stimulating discussion in the team, we have had several discussions around this subject matter. There are definitely issues that need to be ironed out before a startup could, in fact, proceed. And one of those issues, a very big one, is in fact, where do you pitch yourself? What area of the market do you actually choose to enter? Our research indicated that going into manufacturing is a higher risk proposition than that of going into a services segment. The reason being that manufacturing is now dominated by one or two very large producers of drones, mainly based in China. The price advantages that those large-scale operations can actually present are insurmountable by a smaller company. So that leaves us with the services sector. And for us to establish what part of the services sector we would enter, we would need time to actually do a market study. Beyond that, then one has to look at the skills necessary to support that study by way of market entry. Clearly, we are dealing with data, therefore, there needs to be some level of expertise in terms of data assessment, data interrogation, and then adding value to that. Again, another area that requires some deep thinking. And of course, deep thinking takes time and that's where the funding issues come in. So the answer is, in a roundabout way, sir, yes, we have. There are good chances for us to actually go in that direction. It will take, but it is possible that we may create that time opportunity to embark on that process. I hope that gives you a reasonable answer at this point in time.
Yeah, that was a comprehensive answer, Robert, indeed. But I was just wondering about, could you not identify a niche area for manufacturing? For example, you could say we're not far from the Alps. You could specialize potentially in mountain rescue drones exclusively. And you could seek customers from the gendarmerie, the armed forces, and so on and so forth.
Yes, indeed. I think my colleague, Mr. Scanlon, could add to my answers there in response to your second question. Marco?
So, as Robert pointed out, we really approached this project from an entrepreneurial point of view. We were trying to approach it as what would we do with drones. And some markets we have identified. We talked about smart farming a lot, and we're maybe a year behind the trends, but there's still a lot of potential to go in that. So that's one area we've talked about a lot, about how you convince farmers who have been farming the same way for generations to start using newer technology. And so we've had those discussions. When you talk about specific manufacturing, as Robert said, it's sort of a hard proposition to get into. And so you can see a niche market, for example, mountain rescue, but there's a lot of hardware that goes into it, which as a team, we are quite heavy on mechanical or aerospace engineers. There's a lot of software and programming and flight dynamics that goes into it too, and we're really softer on software engineering. So as a team, we never concretely talked about entering the business for drone manufacturing. We talked about making a drone for our own benefit, but to break into the manufacturing market, there's a whole host of knowledge that's needed, and that's why tons and tons of money is being pumped into R&D, and which explains why, as Robert pointed out, DJI, so a Chinese drone manufacturer, is dominating the market, is because they're spending the most on R&D, and it's really tough to match that. We've picked out some service markets that seem really interesting, and for us, it really seems to be smart farming, because the applications are endless. But at the moment, discussions have stayed more or less preliminary.
example, what we could potentially do is indeed buy the drone from an existing manufacturer to our specification, and then that specification will be based on our market requirements, our customers' requirements, and then provide a service based on that. And indeed, that gives us the chance to extend our service stroke product range to other similar areas, like Marco said, perhaps other rescue situations, disaster recovery, and maybe local farming too. If we were to have a strategy, that's likely to be the least risky financially.
Well, congratulations. I'm really stunned what you have done. I want to congratulate the whole team. If I look at the beginning when you guys started the first meetings and now the presentation at the end, I think it's not only the content of drones that you have learned, but also how to work in a team and at the end have a wonderful presentation and a nice format for the presentation. So I want to congratulate all of you, not only those on stage, but also behind the stage. And as usual, the people behind, not on stage, are more than those on stage. So I think congratulations to all of you. And also from my side, it has been fun working with you guys. The questions I have, you very well looked into the pros and cons of drones and satellites. You also indicated that there are ways to augment satellite services by drone services. Have you looked into how would that work? How would you make a company XYZ that is in the primary domain of satellites cooperate with a drone operator who may be a different company? How do you exchange data? How did you look into those legal aspects and operational aspects, how you could merge those two services?
Thank you. I think Theo has an answer to that question.
Indeed, yes. During the TP, we have seen some example where the cooperation between satellite and drone could be very close. It would be very interesting for a company already operating satellite to go in. For example, I have everything about climate studies where a global view is needed first in order to have a precise location to send drones. Another example I have in mind is the Fuego example. It's a project trying to assist the forest fire. So satellite can detect the fire from the space. It can detect the fire very soon and then give the precise location so drones can actively mitigate this fire. We can really see here the cooperation aspect. And I think that's somewhere where a company will act. If you do you have something else? No.
You indicated flight altitude, certain limitations differing in different countries. You brought up the licensing of your drone, the registration of the drone, pilot certification, etc. Have you looked into air traffic control as the third element usually in aviation that is responsible for managing the airspace?
So with air traffic control, currently it pertains to aircrafts, and if we're looking up into space, there's a different organization that looks into regulating what satellites are up there. But for drones specifically, the drone legislations are trying to accommodate with air traffic controllers in order to develop certain restrictions on where they can fly and where they can't fly. But as of yet, there aren't any proper regulations in place where simultaneously. And Marco's going to add something.
Sorry. When it comes to regulations, as we pointed out with a slide before, one of the advantages of drones is that they can be deployed quickly, and that lets them be deployed without needing air traffic permission, and that's up to a certain altitude, and that's usually done for safety. Now, you don't want to change that because being able to deploy drones quickly is one of those huge advantages that gives them a benefit over aircraft in remote sensing. and that gives them even to a certain level of benefit over satellites and remote sensing as well. So that's why altitude regulations exist in the first place. And so having them normalized makes a more straightforward platform, but you don't want to ever take those away because that, cripples drone technology in a big way. So at some point, and for higher altitude drones, you need air permission, and that makes sense. There's safety issues. But there needs to be, just like we need a clear definition between what's airspace and what's space, you could make the same claim. We need a clear definition of what's airspace and what's free for public or commercial use for drones.
Thank you. I believe we now have the signal to say time's up. Thank you very much indeed for your questions, for the attention you've given to us this afternoon, and I hope the takeaway message is that drones are here to stay. They will be a surprising technological product in the long run, and just watch out for them. Thank you indeed.
So thank you once again to Team Project Dragonfly for that glimpse of the future. We will now take a half-hour break and we will return for Team Project TerraSpace in half an hour. So if you're out there on the web, please tune back then. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, all those of you watching on the internet. So I'm very pleased to welcome you back to the second half of the MSS 17 Team Project final presentations. Without any more ado, I will hand you over to Team TerraSpace. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joshua Rosera, and I am the planning coordinator for Team TerraSpace, and I'm here today to introduce you to our team project. I would like to extend a special welcome to all those in the audience here and also to everyone who's watching online from home. So, who are we? We are a group of 22 aspiring space professionals who represent 13 countries and numerous academic and professional backgrounds. And our name, TerraSpace, is a portmanteau of the Latin word terra, for meaning earth, and also the acronym SPACE, which stands for Space-Inspired Processes Applied to CSR Endeavors. And the reason why we chose this name is because we found that it was a great way to tie together the very terrestrial nature of the oil and gas extraction sector with the seemingly infinite possibilities of outer space. So the mission of Team TerraSpace was to assess the impact of new and upcoming space-based and space-derived solutions on the corporate social responsibility practices of oil and gas companies. Now, in order to achieve this, we have three main aims: to study the impact of new and upcoming space-based and space-derived solutions on the oil and gas sector, to identify the means by which these technologies could have an impact and be implemented, and finally, to recommend systems and solutions that could ultimately lead to the betterment of the oil and gas sector. And to support these aims, we have 6 main objectives. First of all, to identify the CSR needs and trends in the oil and gas sector, to identify the gaps between the CSR needs and how they are currently or not currently being addressed by the CS or the oil and gas sector, to identify technological crossovers between the space and oil and gas sectors for CSR efforts, to develop an understanding of the potential applications for new and upcoming space-based and space-derived technologies, to identify spin-offs and spin-ins, and to recommend solutions and systems that could ultimately be used to enhance the CSR practices of the oil and gas sector. So many of you may be wondering, what is corporate social responsibility, or CSR, as you'll hear a lot today? Well, corporate social responsibility can be defined as the duty of a company or a corporate body to protect the interests of society above and beyond what is required and demanded by law, acting as a means by which a corporation can align societal values with their internal business operations. Now, during our research phase, we identified from all the different major oil and gas corporations 3 main areas that we chose that appear the most often in corporate social responsibility plans. And these 3 areas are employment and labor practices, environmental management, and social and community benefits. And we'll be exploring these in greater detail today. Now, the other thing we have to talk about, obviously, since this is the International Space University, is the space connection. Space technologies are often used by oil and gas companies, but often in very predictable ways for things like prospecting, navigation, and communication. And while there are new and up-and-coming technologies that are starting to become applied in the sector, progress has generally been rather slow. So in our research, we identified 6 key technologies and systems and solutions that could drastically disrupt the status quo. And so today, we challenge you to identify this in our discussion, these 6 main technologies, namely the Internet of Things, the space sector spin-offs, next-generation satellite constellations, remote operations, analog studies, and alternative energy sources. So as we were going through our research, we would look at each of these technologies and try to address the impact of how these systems and solutions would affect the CSR practices of the oil and gas sector. And there are 2 main ways which are currently done in industry to measure CSR effectiveness. And so what we tried to do was combine them together into one solution to make it a little bit more applicable and appropriate to what we were researching. So there's the triple bottom line method and the global reporting initiative. And both of these methodologies for measuring impact look at a wide variety of non-primary business function related activities, such as environmental concerns, social and community benefits, sustainability, and so on and so forth. So we've combined these 2 things together and have also enhanced it with our interdisciplinary understanding of the ISU main disciplines. And so in looking at all of these things together, we've been able to rank the impact of these various technologies and see how they might be applied to the CSR practices of oil and gas companies moving forward. So today, I will now pass along the floor to my colleagues here. They will take you through the world, to the town of Minerva, where there has recently been an awful disaster where the supertanker Aldomax has crashed and has leaked oil into the sea. So this is a couple of days after the accident has occurred, and we will be looking at the after effects and how CSR practices in the space sector could have helped to mitigate some of the issues that the company has witnessed. So without further ado, I'd like to pass things off to my colleagues. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome back to TerraSpace News. Following the previous programme on how to define a drone, tonight we'll be airing a special segment of our Space in Crises series in order to address the recent oil spill from the company Petrostras that's been dominating headlines for the past week. As some of you may already know, last Thursday there was an explosion aboard the supertanker Aldomax, a big ship vessel that was built to carry crude oil. This explosion led to not only workers' lives being endangered, but vast amounts of coastline being irreparably damaged due to the large amount of oil released as the tanker sunk. This oil spill is a result of human actions and indeed perhaps human error, with this particular case the responsibility lying with the oil and gas giant Petrostras. As such, our overall topic of conversation for tonight will be that of corporate social responsibility. As usual with our Space in Crises series, over the next hour we'll be hearing from experts within the field and having a discussion with our panellists here today with the aim to answer the question, can the space industry help CSR efforts in the oil and gas sector? We'll also be hearing some short editions from our field reporter to get an idea of what the general public think. As usual with TerraSpace News, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet us your opinions, your comments and your questions on our Twitter account @TerraSpace News. I'm joined here tonight by Mr. Sergei Ioda, Head of Corporate Social Responsibility for the company Petrostras. He's kindly agreed to be here with us today to talk about how Petrostras can hopefully move on from the recent challenges. On my left is Mr. Nicolas Jalbert, a familiar face to many of you, I'm sure, who's been our space expert several times previously and currently works for the space company Coco Space. Thank you both for joining me here tonight.
Thank you for being here.
Happy to be back.
So before we enter our discussion, we'll now remind us what prompted tonight's special segment.
After what is believed to have been a fuel leak from the main engine, a massive explosion knocked the supertanker Aldomax. Not far from shore, on its way to docking in Minerva, help was quickly dispatched to aid the stranded ship. As the tanker quickly began to take on water, the 20 crew members were left with no choice but to abandon ship into the oil-laden waters. With fires burning all around them, most of the workers managed to get on lifeboats, but some were forced to jump overboard into the water and swim until rescue. With many crew members sustaining injuries, 3 men were immediately midi-based to the nearest hospital for life-threatening burns. As the crew made their way to the shore, the Aldomax continued its descent, releasing nearly 2 million barrels of crude oil into the ocean. The Aldomax is the largest tanker in history to sink this close to shore, and as the oil begins to scar this pristine coastline, the impact is undeniable. Minerva, a classic coastal town, a town that calls itself the ecotourism capital of the world, finds itself crippled by the sleek black liquid coating its local marine habitats and wildlife. While tourism has been put on hold, efforts have been dispatched to clean as much of the mess as possible and to rescue the stranded wildlife. For days now, rescue workers have been washing by hand various species of seabirds as well as the prized sea otter population. As a species listed as endangered, the shores of Minerva have been a haven for these small furry creatures, and in turn they have provided a significant financial boost to the town's much-needed ecotourism companies. It is estimated that ecotourism employs more than 30% of the town's year-round residents, and the question of how this will affect the town's ability to survive is on everyone's mind.
I have Sarah Jones with me today. She's a resident of Minerva and also the owner of Ecoseas, an ecotourism company that focuses on the training of conservation via the encounter with the local sea otter population. Sarah, could you please tell us your thoughts on this disaster and how this affects you and the town?
Sure. Animals, it's primarily seabirds and sea otters. What happens is when the oil coats their
feathers and their fur. They actually lose the ability to insulate themselves from the harsh elements, and sadly many of these animals will die from hypothermia if this goes untreated. We love these animals here in Minerva, and we've lived in harmony with them since the town was founded. So I personally rely on them for my livelihood, and in return I respect them and I protect them the best that I can.
Oh, I see. You mentioned this affects your livelihood, but do you think this will have a financial effect on Minerva?
Without a doubt. So we are primarily a tourism town, and if our local habitats and wildlife that make us special die, this town will also die. So we know right now that this spill has pretty much canceled this year's tourism season. So our efforts are really being focused on cleaning as much as we can and helping the sea otters so that we can resume business next year. I personally got involved with ecotourism because I really love these animals and the nature that they live in, and I wanted to share this love with other people. So right now our main concern is the health of this wildlife.
Of course. Thank you very much for your comments, Sarah. I am joined by Adam Taylor, one of the crew members of Aldomax. Thank you very much for being here, Adam.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Adam, could you tell us more about your experience? What did you feel in the disaster? What were you thinking? Were you afraid?
Well, to be honest, initially we didn't realise it had been an explosion. There was me and several others below deck, and we heard this quite loud bang. And initially we thought maybe the ship's run aground because it was rocking quite violently. So we went upstairs to investigate and suddenly realised the situation was much worse than we first expected. There was fire and smoke billowing all over the ship and burning oil all over the deck. Our first response was panic, but of course, we've been trained in these kind of examples. And so we had to just sort of, be calm, focus, and then put those procedures into practice.
Yes. You mentioned you were trained for this kind of situation. Does that mean you were expecting something like this to happen?
No, of course not. You never expect something like this to happen to you. I mean, obviously, we know it's a dangerous workplace, and we've been trained in these disasters when these disasters happen, but you never expect it to happen to you. I think, if anything, it was just lucky how close to the shore we were. I mean, normally we're much further out, and it would have taken a lot longer for rescue to get to us. But unfortunately for me and a few others, we weren't able to get to the lifeboats because the route was blocked, and so we actually had to jump overboard. And then we were left in the water swimming for quite a while before first responders actually got to us.
Wow. Wow, this was clearly a very dangerous situation. In fact, 3 of your crew members are still in the hospital because of the sustained burns they had in this accident. What does that make you feel? Would you be willing to share on your prospects of returning to work in this line of work?
Well, firstly, let's say, thankfully, these 3 crew members of mine, they've recently come out of intensive care. They're in stable condition in hospital. Our thoughts go out to their families, and hopefully they will be returning home soon. For me personally, it doesn't really affect how I feel about the job. I mean, obviously, a disaster like this doesn't just go away. It will stick with me for a while. But we know how dangerous this line of work is. We know what we signed up for. I think all we can do now is just try and improve our safety practices and emergency procedures so that when events like this do happen in the future, we don't get as many casualties.
Of course. Well, thank you very much for your insight, Adam. We will be following.
Thank you, Hanan. So after hearing the opinion out on the field, it's clear that the current question is, what can be done to further prevent incidents like this from happening again? TerraSpace News has investigated the subject and, as always, put a little space into it. Finally, hearing from, firstly hearing from Adam Taylor about what happened to him and his colleagues really highlights the dangers facing those that work in this industry. It really is a high-risk job, and as such, CSR initiatives in order to progress and help prevent such as this in employment and labour practices is of utmost importance. In order to examine some of the main challenges faced by employees of the oil and gas industry, please welcome Ms. Joanne Tan. She's currently in an international remote location, and she's been a health and safety specialist for the past 10 years. Hopefully she'll be able to give us more of an oversight in the current situation. Thank you for being here tonight, Ms. Tan.
Thank you, Jenna. I'm happy to be here tonight. Work health and safety has come under threat due to oil and gas companies venturing to deeper, more remote and dangerous areas. The real problem is that in some cases, the law hasn't caught up with the more modern and oil and gas extraction methods. The compensation package offered by oil and gas companies are supposed to be in line with the risks the workers undertake. Employment safety is the priority of the companies, so they have come to their own solution.
So to start off with, what are some of the challenges facing this industry and people that work on these platforms? I mean, based on what we saw recently, it's clearly not an easy job.
No, indeed. Common risks for employees in this industry include force fires, explosions, high-pressure lines, confined space, equipment use, ergonomic hazards, machine hazards, electrical hazards, and vehicle collisions. It may shock our viewers to learn that in 2011, out of 155 occupational fatalities in private mining industry of the US, the oil and gas sectors has accounted for over 70% of those fatalities. In 2014, the Petrobras had a series of 6 accidents in a single week for multiple refineries, including a death of worker after a refinery explosion. And in 2016, one of its employees had a fatal fall from a 12-meter platform. Those all demonstrate the lack of coherence of the company's social responsibility standard and the real safety protocols.
Isn't it rather concerning? I mean, in your opinion, is it that difficult for industry to address these challenges?
Yes, it can be. Some of the platforms are incredibly hard to reach and experience poor weather conditions. Much like astronauts, in fact, the oil rig workers are required to use teamwork for most tasks. It is difficult to achieve if the workforce is mainly constructed from contractors. That is to say, temporary workers procured from external sources. BP, for example, has 80% of its contractors. That also means the workforce constantly required retraining videos, and it is relatively problematic depending on occupations.
Okay, so what about if something goes wrong on one of these platforms?
Emergency escape are very important at sites where explosions are reality. However, long response time is difficult to overcome due to location and bad weather conditions. So the industry still needs options for evacuation and assurance of work safety in extreme situations. Not only can operations demanded the oil and gas companies be physically dangerous. However, due to the remoteness of those sites, mental health is also a factor. Isolation due to lack of connectivity is psychologically stressful for workers. To quickly remark on CSR, since I know it's our focus tonight, CSR in terms of employment labor practice can include anything from education to labor rights and working conditions. However, since there is no metric for CSR, there is no real data for supporting the evaluation of the effect on the workers.
Ms. Tan, thank you very much. Now let's take a quick look at what the general public know and think about CSR.
So, what do you think about this type of activity, which we call the corporate social responsibilities?
Well, I think they may be doing activities to promote environmental protection.
It's all good, but for me, this is still not covering the damage they are doing.
I think this may be taken 2 ways. One way, they could be taken as a mask to hide their pollutions to the environment. But in another way, if they're trying to do good to the environment, then it's great for the community itself.
They need to properly educate the public about what they're doing.
I think there's a limitation because it's counterproductive to them. Because they're producing oil and gas, and whatever they can suggest, at some point it will damage them.
I'm pretty skeptical, not about its effectiveness, actually they are welcome, but about the rationale. CSR should not be an alibi to oil and gas companies to pursue the profit and in the meantime clear their conscience.
So jumping right in, Mr. Jalbert,
Yes.
how is CSR and space related, specifically to do with employment and labor practices?
Well, both sectors actually share many of the same concerns as mentioned by Mrs. Tan. Any mistake can lead to the loss of human life and the loss of billions in taxpayer money. Another similarity is also the way the space sector deals with situational analogies. And we can see today how much communication and outreach are of such importance. In addition, space agencies must constantly monitor the health of the astronauts, and they will be able to count in the emergence of new technologies, such as the Internet of Things, as well as new satellite constellations, as to support both terrestrial and space activities. But one must know that the oil and gas sector already uses space systems as part of their usual operations. For example, they provide teletraining, teleeducation, as well as telemedicine. So innovation and collaboration between these two sectors is crucial for the advances in both technologies. And moreover, one of the key aspects of CSR is to reduce the risk of health and safety to their workers. And one of the best ways to do this is, of course, to remove those workers from hazardous areas. So how to do this? Well, by remotely operate mining machinery via the use of satellites. In this way, this could provide an excellent opportunity as to reduce those risks. And as an example, Rio Tinto, which is one of the world's leading mining and metal companies, is currently developing the program Mine of the Future, which seeks to develop fully automated and teleoperated mining machinery in the Australia's Pilbara region.
Mr. Oyede, could you give us more of a background into how the oil and gas sector approaches CSR, especially to do with employees?
Well, public continue to ask more overall social stability today, and we try to do our best. We spent more than $25 billion annually to CSR activities since 2006. And also, we're trying to improve our labor and safety practice for our workers from all of the fronts. For example, we have a universal time in average of 5 hours for every one of our remote located platforms. But it was not the case with Aldamax, since it was a ship. But it's a thing, what about we must think for future? Also, we employed mitigation-oriented practice for diseases such as malaria and Ebola. And we trained thousands of healthcare workers, which help us to treat malaria in high-risk area where we operate.
This sounds rather extensive, but what about when someone gets hurt on one of these remote platforms?
Oh yes, proximity to aid and availability to evacuate people when you're in the middle of nowhere and hospitals so far away. It's a really hard task. But I think that telemedicine is one way to solve this problem. And once Royal Dulwich Shell President of Healthcare said that telemedicine helped them to reduce unnecessary evacuations for 60%, and I think it's really true.
Telemedicine, could you be a bit more specific, please?
Oh yes, of course. It's when medical professionals consulted our workers on the long distance and make life-saving decisions. For example, Rover Globetrotter second ship will save 2 lives and avoid 3 unnecessary evacuations by utilizing of telemedicine for last 4 months. And if company may take them labor and safety practice like part of them CSR, it would help them to reduce some medical expenses, and it means that it'll help them to save some money.
Thank you for sharing those insights. Mr. Jabet, do you have anything to add to this at all?
Well, the space sector can help in a variety of ways, and spin-offs are one of the major benefits of space investment. For example, the already existing NASA Space Blanket is used in most emergency situations. And there is also a space derive device that could help in emergency situations. It is not so much of a space plane, but more of a sea vessel style of capsule that could actually get workers out of the disaster zone and provide life support until receiving rescue. So for me, those two technologies can help provide solutions for health and safety of the workers in emergency situations, such as explosions or hard weather.
I've just received a tweet from Volker in Cologne that is asking Mr. Jalbert, he wants to clarify, so does astronaut health monitoring happen a lot in the space industry?
Well, first, thanks, Volker, for the question. Of course, it is our first priority. And in the future, both the oil and gas sector and the space sector will be able to count on the emergence of a technology called the Internet of Things, also referred as the IoT, to help provide solutions to these processes. And while speaking about this, it makes me think of a suggestion I could say to my colleague, Mr. Arada. Why not try to copy some of the practices the space sector uses to maintain the health of their astronauts in very hard-to-reach platforms such as the ISS. Because you have to know that the ISS and its international partners actually develop standards and levels of practices to maintain the health of the astronauts at a certain level, and this regardless of their nationality. So in other words, every participating nation is able to use their own types of medicine, types of food, and exercise equipment as long as they maintain those standards. So, in my mind, if the oil and gas, sector could gather and create such standards, this could actually be really beneficial in order to mitigate the risk to health and safety of their workers. And it could also ensure that workers are adequately prepared for the job, and also that all working conditions are acceptable.
This is a very interesting proposal, but I would like to jump that it isn't #1 solution to have workers just on the remote side. Sometimes we operate in the environment which is too hot or too cold for people, but robots will be able to work there. Also, we have some remote control facilities, but it represents just a drop of water in the ocean of global oil and gas industry.
I can imagine. Mr. Jabba, I'd like to go back to the Internet of Things that you mentioned previously. How do you envision this having an impact?
Well, firstly, the Internet of Things can give great insight into for the health and safety of both employees and equipment. For example, the ISS uses various sensors to monitor the CO2 levels of its atmosphere. But going to more details, the Internet of Things principles is to actually collect data thanks to various sensors and integrate it in order to improve decision-making processes. For example, to enhance practices, prevent failures, safeguard workers. So, and if I may add, in the case of a business, I think they could use this technology as to create a sort of, let's say, an occupational health and safety support system.
And what would a system like this typically entail?
Well, okay, so one of the main challenges when it comes to health and safety is about the number of people that are involved and the many ways in which they can, they may come at harm. So what is needed is a system that tracks people and collects data from various sources. So I think the emergence of the Internet of Things and new Saturn constellations will provide an excellent opportunity as to implement such a system. Such a system. But more practically speaking, the IoT can actually greatly help a company's operations. For example, in situ oil rig operations, they could, one could actually gather very, substantial data about, worker locations or an operator's, facility's operating status. And this data could be transferred to the company's control center. But, besides, those terrestrial applications, there are many other space-based sensors that could be very valuable in order to mitigate the dangers to health and safety of the workers. For example, meteorological satellites could provide real-time updates of weather for outdoor working conditions, or GPS constellations could provide extremely accurate positioning of every object within centimeters of the actual location, and this could help, workers find facilities or managers make inventory of the materials and equipment.
Such system can also may work in a large scale. For example, sometimes country must take a supervised role in the industry, and with support of the Internet of Things, it will be much more easier to gather and analyze information in case to make some specific decisions in different scenarios. And our industry is really interested in such a system. It would be also beneficial in the emergency, when decisions might be taken immediately, and with disaster monitoring and risk mechanism, risk and efforts could be coordinated together to aid disaster area.
So, to me, it seems that much can be learned from the space sector in order to address some of these challenges in the oil and gas industry, especially to do with employment and labour practices. But I'm afraid we're going to have to press on to the next theme of the evening as we have limited time. As mentioned previously, we all know that operations undertaken in the oil and gas industry can have severe adverse effects for the environment. Following the clip shown earlier this evening, we could see the effect it had on the ecosystem, some of the species living nearby. TerraSpace News has put together some very moving images from this incident. Environmental management is, of course, an integral component of CSR, and as such, some of the aspects we'll now be investigating include emerging international policies to help make these effects less devastating and how space technology can tie into this. Our expert analyst for environmental topics tonight is Mr. Pablo Caya, an environmental protection specialist from the Department of Environmental Affairs. He's been investigating the impacts of disasters such as this for several years now. Isn't that right, Mr. Caya?
Yes, thank you very much, Jenna. Yes, I've been working on environmental issues for a long time.
All right, so what can you tell us about environmental challenges and gaps, and how does this relate to CSR?
Right, so first of all, it should be said that there's already been a lot of improvement in environmental care practices. Comparing to the 1970s, where 300,000 tons of oil were dropped into the ocean, this number was reduced only to hundreds of tons by 2009. However, there are two main issues that the environment is affected from this industry. The first one is the impact of operations, and the second, the occurrence of accidents. So regarding the impact of operations, we have identified that the main problem are the emissions. And for the people who are watching at home, and also for all the audience, for them to understand the impact, I got some of numbers that they will be easier to identify. There's an example in Pakistan that the emissions increased by 167% since 2013. And out of this number, 35.2% comes directly from the oil extraction practices and 29% from the gas industry. Another example is the Keystone XL project in US and Canada, which has an impact annually of 110 million tons of carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere. Regarding the oil spills, well, as you have seen last week, we have terrible images. This kind of spill of materials usually threatens the whole surrounding environment and the water quality. And it should remind us also of the oil spill that happened in 2010, the Deep Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico, which was the second most publicized environmental catastrophe in decades. The short-term effects of this spill is the reduced mobility and the high fatality rates of the region species that could even lead to their extinction. And the long-term effects are harder to quantify due to the altered eating and breeding habits of the region species and their subsequent adaptation abilities. But after an oil spill, there is also the process of cleanup. So one of the most important factors for the success of a cleanup is the speed of response. And this is a critical challenge because of the industry is increasingly drilling in remote locations to access new reserves.
So are there no regulations in place that can help with this?
In general, yes. There is a trend going on in policy mentality towards a more conscientious extraction in the oil practices, especially in the international scale. So, for example, the G7 summit in 2015 had an agreement to phase out petroleum-based fuel use by the end of the century. The United Nations as well, in the COP21 summit in Paris, so over 200 nations agree to achieve zero net greenhouse gases emissions by the second half of the century. The aim is to reduce by 40 to 70% from the coal, oil, and gas industry from the levels that were recorded in 2010 by 2050. All of these summits serve as an integral tool for CSR if these companies maintain their adherence to these goals. However, there are not enough international pollution standards due to the fact that most of the regulations tend to be set by the countries themselves.
Okay, so what you're saying is, if I'm not mistaken, we currently have three key necessities. The first being to improve environmental monitoring activities. The second is to increase the number of international pollution standards. And the third is to improve and increase almost the environmental assessment of proposed pipeline routes. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. You got it right. Yeah, but there are definitely other challenges as well, including the limiting factors of the spatial resolution and refresh rate taken in the images taken remotely from satellites. And in this sector, it's really hard to detect specific emission sources because they tend to be really tiny, especially when leaks are starting in the industry. Another example regarding carbon emissions is that carbon taxes, for example, are based on estimations of emissions that are presented by the same emitting companies. So you see, there's no real monitoring of the greenhouse gases. And future space assets would be ideal to assure that these companies pay their corresponding taxes according to the negative effects of their business activities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaya. Now let's take a quick look at what the public think.
Well, I have seen multiple reports on how there are accidents like oil spill to contaminate maybe the ocean and affects the marine animals or even some other wildlife.
There's a lot of stigma against oil and gas, but I don't think that's the right way to approach this industry.
An optimal use of the current available technology could enhance our capability to manage environmental issues.
Somehow we're still using coal, we're still using oil, which is not good for our environment. And we're pretty sure there is other alternative sustainable solutions.
If they don't have revolutionary breakthroughs in their methods in terms of protecting the environment, they will remain a negative effect overall.
Now, many things were mentioned by the analyst, and quite frankly, we could probably talk about the environment for hours. So let's stick to what was discussed. So emissions were mentioned. Can either of you tell me, can emissions currently be detected by space technologies? And if so, is this being used in the industry?
Well, yes, they can be detected with current technology, however, not in great details. As mentioned by Mr. Kaya, the actual spatial resolution doesn't allow the detection of specific emissions, such as leaks. The available satellites in orbit can depict emissions, however, large quantities of them, and they're not really accurate, and most of them are estimated. And moreover, there is not even an emissivity index that was established. So if you look at this from a regulation perspective, this is quite an important gap, since it is actually possible with current technology, and it would provide substantial data from policymakers across the globe.
This is a very important topic, and more, it's a key technology which should be developed. We've been already taking several measures to reduce emission, but we are not reflecting data. And this application would be really beneficial for us, as this accessibility of information for public is really important for us. And with clear stated information, public trust could provide for us, and it would be quantified. I would like to add that we care about environment just like everybody else, and with use of this technology, it would support other attempts to help.
Okay, so in your opinion, is space technology moving forward to support these kind of applications? We talked about satellite constellations earlier. Are these the kind of projects that can help with environmental management?
Oh yes, without a doubt. And the figurehead being LiDAR technologies that are actually quickly improving at the moment. LiDAR technologies and imagery are used to depict details that cannot be captured by conventional remote sensing methods. More practically, more explanations, LiDAR technologies are really accurate laser ranging techniques that can allow one to create 3D topology maps. And one of its main applications, for example, is in the NASA OSIRIS-REx mission. It is used in the Teledyne optic system, and this mission overall goal is to study the characteristic of an asteroid by studying its surface.
I think it would be really beneficial for our industry. When small oil leaks occurs, our industry put a lot of atoms to have a real result. But with support of the technology, surveys could be happening more often and more effective manner.
That's right. There are several benefits that come, from space investment and space research. But let's go back to the satellite constellations that we mentioned earlier. If the teams that are deployed after a disaster could actually be supported by a constant communication via the use of satellites, this could really greatly improve their efficiency. And we said it before, and I repeat once again, what matters after a disaster is the response time, whether this disaster is man-made or natural.
Okay, so moving on, are there any up-and-coming space technologies that can help with the prevention of oil or gas leaks?
Yes, I'm here with another application which would be really useful for it. I know that NASA currently make a contract with a certain company to develop corrosion inhibitors, and they currently use one of the primers in NASA Kennedy Space Center. I know that this technology would become commercially available as well, but price is really still very high. Do you have insight in this?
Well, yes, I do. There are several researchers on developing corrosion inhibitors, and NASA's part of it. As you said, Surtreat developed a pigmented epoxy primer, which price is quite high. But for me, the savings could be made on the lifespan of steel itself, that could be greatly improved, and by reducing the surface preparation as to apply this primer. So I think it would be a good idea to consider such a technology for large companies. And another example of this is ESA's, together with BioClear. They developed a method as to identify patches of soil that could contain corrosion-causing bacteria. And interestingly enough, This was discovered while implementing air filters on the ISS for the astronauts. So these two technologies could be really useful for the oil and gas sector.
These are really good developments. We already have an inspector who checks pipelines with ultrasonic scanner. But is there a way to use both technologies at the same time?
Well, yes, I think so. And I'll repeat, the oil and gas companies could greatly benefit from this, as to actually detect the pipelines that could suffer from corrosion, or the ones that are actually suffering from corrosion, right? So I don't see any valid reason as to not use these two technologies at the same time.
Well, I think we'll just have a look and when technology becomes mature and commercially available as well. But soon I think it would be incorporated.
Right, I'm going to jump in here with one more question before you two get too carried away. How about the actual collection of the spills? So I'm talking about the strategies to contain the affected area, to prevent the material released from spreading further. I mean, we saw some absolutely terrible images from the event last week. And how is space technology improving this kind of aspect?
Well, this is a good question, Ms. Tiwana. Well, it's a sensitive topic. There's no doubt about that. When a catastrophe happens, everybody tries to react at once as to mitigate the effects for human health and also, of course, the environment. And there are a lot of space benefits that could apply to that, and especially in the research sector. And for example, life sciences at NASA, research that currently being conducted, are actually looking at soil remediation via plant-fungal combinations. So in more layman terms, they're actually looking at bacteria that could oxidize phenolic compounds as to remove the fuel and other contaminants from the soils. And so for me, this could be a really cost-effective solution as well as easy to implement and requiring low maintenance. So it would be a natural way to reduce the effects of such a disaster.
Yes, that's right. We can use this combination to mitigate some small lakes, and we hope to see results in the future.
Thank you both. Now to close off this episode of Space in Crises, we're going to move on to the final theme of CSR for tonight. That of the social rights of communities that coexist with oil and gas companies. I would like to now introduce Mr. Sid Kumar, who works as a senior researcher at Oxfam International. First of all, I'd like to thank you for being with us tonight, Mr. Kumar. To begin with, would you be able to explain to us here in the studio and to the viewers at home why helping communities is such a major part of some companies'
Hello
CSR
everyone,
policies?
and thank you for having me. It is an important aspect as these companies need to consider how their operations can affect the people living close to these sites in which these companies operate. Also, in the event of disasters like we saw last week, oil spills can cause significant impact on local communities. We can see clearly that Minerva's most important social impact was regarding tourism. I believe we were fortunate enough to not have the fishing grounds polluted so far, and that is due to the efforts of containing the spill.
So just to make it clear, these sometimes fragile communities that live locally to the operations of oil and gas companies can actually be seriously impacted as a result of all these operations.
Yes, undoubtedly. There have been multiple examples of where leakages have caused numerous issues for local populations. Oil operations in Nigeria especially have witnessed many pipeline leaks which have caused large-scale damage. The spills have contaminated farmland and fisheries, affecting the livelihood of nearby communities. There have been cases of explosions and fires resulting from these spills. A pipeline explosion in Lagos, Nigeria in 2006 destroyed many buildings and homes and resulted in more than 500 casualties. Similarly, the Jesse disaster of '98, also in Nigeria, saw over 1,000 people die from a pipeline explosion. Company CSR policy towards the communities is becoming extremely important, as we can see that the lack of it could result in large loss of life.
If I may, I would like to quickly add something. These events which Mr. Kumar mentioned, it isn't just a company mistake. Companies trying to make their the best to protect it. But it's really hard task to keep safe many miles of pipelines.
Mr. Kumar, are you still with us?
In many of these illegal tapping cases, however, it is believed to be a result of local communities being angered by the lack of shared wealth they receive from the oil companies, even though they allowed them to operate in their region. This shows that there is a need for CSR regarding communities to ensure smooth relationships between the people and the companies. Sometimes there are also issues with respect to the cultural heritage sites of local communities. CSR is therefore essential for these companies so that they do not trespass on sacred grounds, but instead work with the communities to find alternative solutions.
I see. So without the inclusion of these crucial CSR policies to protect these communities, they can suffer from these operations, especially those in the perhaps less developed areas of the world, perhaps places where a high proportion of these extraction operations in oil and gas actually do take place.
Exactly.
So, Sid Kumar, you've explained to us the importance of CSR to protect communities. We've just discussed that. Is it being applied by the oil and gas companies, and are the activities being conducted in the sector actually helping these people?
Yes, this type of CSR is taken very seriously by oil and gas industry. Just look at their websites and you'll see there are whole sections allocated to acknowledging their dedication to helping communities. The companies know they can have significant impacts on local communities, and also so they partake in countless activities to try alleviate some of these issues. Participation in the communities is also vital for companies' public image, showing that they care about the people. These activities are especially important during times of crisis like the recent spill, as the public will have a renewed animosity towards the oil industry. A positive image shows that the company is aligning themselves with societal values, which can influence their business. If a company is viewed in a bad light, then socially minded investors will be pulling off. Having a positive image will also improve the relationship and likelihood of cooperation with local communities in the region that these companies operate. Therefore, companies will often help provide infrastructure to these communities. This can be in the form of building schools, hospitals, roads, providing medical support, and even providing efficient and clean energy. These companies will also often employ their workforce from the local communities and source local goods and services to aid community development.
Do you have any statistics at hand to perhaps give us more of an idea here in the studio, the scale of these investments that you've just talked about?
Shell invested about $122 million in 2015 into what they call social investment. 31% of the funding was allocated to education support, and 21% of it for community development. Another example is from the company ExxonMobil, being a big supporter of malaria initiatives. The funding they have provided has led to the distribution of millions of anti-malaria treatment and diagnostic kits, as well as the training of over 500,000 health workers. The companies will also provide CSR activities for more developing countries as well. These can often appear as funding programs that help students to develop their ability in STEM subjects. Shell has set up around 16 of these programs around the world. Don't be surprised if you see Petrobras making public displays of clean up operations and increased investment in CSR to mend their public image, which has been hurt from this disaster. Hopefully, they've learned a lesson from the terrible PR mess BP found themselves in.
Mr. Kumar, I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but thank you very much. Now let's go to our field reporter, who's asking the public about their opinion on CSR for communities.
So how does the oil and gas industry interact with your community?
Well, as far as I know, they don't directly interact with our community, since there are no production facilities nearby, at least not that I know of.
Directly, I don't think my community interacts with the industry, but I guess, as I said, we all use them, so we can't really live without them right now.
Many people work for the local oil and gas industry. They build roads and they improve our local transport system. And they also financed my academic studies with a full tuition scholarship.
Mr. Jalbert, we've already discussed how the space sector can help CSR initiatives for employment and labour practices, for environmental management. However, I really am struggling to draw the connection between social aspects of CSR and the space sector. I mean, could you perhaps enlighten me?
Of course. Well, where the other two topics we've previously discussed have a direct and significant connection with space, the community impact has a slightly more indirect connection. So firstly, we shall not forget that the oil and gas sector do actually carry a lot of activities to benefit communities. And any space technology that could reduce the cost or enhance the performance of these activities could be of prime importance for a company's CSR. If we take an example, education is one of the most important CSR efforts. So why not complement it with tele-education via the use of satellites to actually give education resources to remote communities that do not usually benefit from these. As an example, one of China's largest oil and gas companies, Sinopec, provides, I think, more than 600 online courses to their staff as to first educate them about health and safety, and also as to enhance their performance. But on another topic, as Mr. Kumar said, there are also ways that the oil and gas sector could provide such remote communities with more efficient and cleaner ways of energy supply, right? So because you have to know that in such regions, with the lack of infrastructures, it can be challenging. But there are some ambitious research in the space sector, and maybe not now, but in the future decades, there would be a way to, and I'm confident about this, to send solar energy via microwaves to Earth, and in a simple and efficient manner. So that could also be a great asset for a company's CSR.
I've just received a tweet from Chris in Strasbourg, who is asking, Mr. Ioda, if these systems are currently available, why are they not already being used by the oil and gas industry?
Well, Chris, I think we should remember that space industry is still very young, if we will compare it to the oil and gas industry. Okay, we are always ready to adopt new technologies to improve our situation. However, due to the limited foundation, we prefer to use something that which we already tried and we know it will give us some outcome.
So you're saying that these space-derived solutions or space-based solutions, as they perhaps become more cost-effective and prove their reliability and their efficiency, that companies such as yours and indeed many others may actually consider adopting them?
Yes, exactly. As Peter Strauss, we're already in discussion of utilizing some space technologies for our workers' education. But we currently didn't decide how it would be used for our CSR activities. But I think soon it would be incorporated.
Mr. Yoda, if I may, I think you are missing out on an opportunity that you could use right now. As you said, yours and many other oil and gas companies already use, space systems in their usual operations, right? So it seems to be just a minor step as to adjust these to benefit communities. An example, satellite imagery is currently used as to locate potential drilling sites, right? So why not extend these activities as to potentially locate heritage sites in the vicinity of those drilling sites? Satellite imagery has proven to be really successful in that domain. And in 2011, if I remember correctly, an infrared spectrum survey has found more than 3,000 underground settlements, ancient underground settlements in Egypt. So not only would this benefit the relationship between the two parties, but it would also help communities rediscover those heritage sites.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Jalbert, but I think that you ignore the fact that we already taken an issue about avoiding cultural heritage into account, and we provide archaeological surveys when we know when area may contain such a site.
I'm sure you do, Mr. Yoda, but you have to question yourself on the efficiency of these processes. Sending several ground units to conduct such surveys could take days or perhaps even weeks, whereas the analysis of satellite imagery could take much less time.
Gentlemen, I'm sure you could go back and forth on this all day, so I think we should move on. Mr. Jalbert, off the top of your head, do you have any other spin-offs that you can think to help benefit communities?
Well, as said before, spin-offs are one of the major benefits of space investment. And, spin-offs such as prosthetic limbs, emergency blankets, and, firefighting equipment could apply to social CSR. And for me, one of the best ones, and, without making any publicity, is the Caspol coating. It's an extremely, good material that has, it's a water-based ceramic polymer compound that has excellent flame-proofing properties and can be applied to almost every surfaces.
And what specific part of the space industry does this spin-off branch from?
Well, the Caspol coating has been developed in India by the National Space Agency. And one of its prime applications is to be applied on launch vehicles to provide thermal protection during the launch phase.
It is interesting that you mentioned a Caspol coating, as it's one of the spin-offs which Spectrostars already in discussion. We hope that it would be really beneficial to mitigate some effects of disaster. And I fully agree with my colleague Mr. Jalbert that this coating has application, really nice application, and it would be provided to communities who have problems with pipeline fires.
Mr. Ida, would you say on the whole that the oil and gas sector is aware of the spin-offs that you utilize that have come from the space sector?
Well, oil and gas companies may have their own incorporated space applications for their operations. And as Spectrostars, we're already looking at spin-offs driven by space technology. And if it comes to our CSR activities, we are already focused in providing some terrestrial options. But I think that space technology soon will be part of our CSR activity.
That's really good to hear. I mean, from where I'm sitting, it sounds like that space can help oil and gas sector not only enhance your operations, but also fulfill some of your CSR initiatives. So it sounds like a win-win situation to me. Mr. Jalbert, you already told us about the up-and-coming Caspol coating. I've just received a tweet from Walter Peters from Belgium, who has heard something about a Celmic test reader. Do you have any insight into this you could provide us?
Well, thank you, Walter, for the tweet. I should have mentioned it before. Yes, it is actually a small handheld device developed by the company Celmic that, by analyzing blood samples and taking blood samples, could provide quick medical diagnostics, right? So this could be really beneficial in areas where communities do not have access to advanced medical facilities, as to assess whether a patient shall be transferred in an urgent manner into a nearby city, having those advanced medical facilities.
It looks like it would be important around the world. But how did this device come from the space sector?
Well, that's a good question, Mr. Yoda. The concept of this idea came from future deep space travel, where astronauts will not have access to medical facilities for a long period of time. So from those situations arose a requirement as to have such a device to provide medical diagnostics in an early fashion.
And how would you envision the oil and gas sector using this? I mean, would they just hand it out to local communities, or?
Well, essentially, yes. I mean, by providing them to local communities, it could greatly reduce the risk, of the loss of human lives by, again, transferring these patients to more advanced medical facilities, in an early manner, because you actually, you detected that really early, okay? And also, it would reduce, the costs, associated with building more infrastructures in those regions, as they maybe don't even have the financial means to do that. So for me, it's a win-win situation.
Well, these discussions have been very insightful, both to me and I'm sure our audience here and at home. To wrap up, I'd like to go over to you, Mr. Jalbert, and do you have any final recommendations you can perhaps share with us, especially Mr. Ioda, about how the oil and gas companies can fulfill their CSR initiatives?
Well, yes, throughout those discussions, I've made, notes, and I have 6 key recommendations, that the space sector could actually provide, by providing solutions, from the space sector, basically. So first, the Internet of Things can allow, an unparalleled view into the operational health and safety of both employees and equipment, and it should be used to maintain assets, safeguard workers, and also prevent failures. Spin-off technologies, we talked about them a lot, such as the Celmic diagnostic test reader, the Caspol coating, and other international safety standards should be employed, as their usage could, prevent, add preventive measures for the health and safety of workers, and also, build, local capacity to monitor diseases or, preserve assets in emergency situations. To continue, satellite constellations and the emergence of new satellite constellations, could significantly boost, wireless communications and remote sensing activities in this all around the globe. So, we should take take advantage of this as to better monitor isolated regions. Also, remote operations should be used to, as we said, by remotely operated machineries and all this should be used to, reduce the risk of that can come to workers in their usual operations, right? Also, space analog studies could provide, that they use to train, astronauts for their missions. We could actually provide parallels and transfer them to the oil and gas sector as to, to improve anthropological and psychological, as well as, technological countermeasures in, every practices. And finally, future development in the next decades of alternative energy sources, such as orbiting arrays using solar energy, could provide also, more cheaper and more efficient means to benefit, local communities across the globe.
Well, that concludes our program for tonight. We will now look to the studio audience for any questions that they may have on this topic. Thank you very much.
An hour.
So if you could direct questions to me, please, and I'll allocate them to the person.
Okay, well, first of all, very nice presentation. Thank you for achieving the most popular tweet that I've ever had. Hopefully that will boost my my ratings even further. There was a question from President Peters, which was too long for him to actually tweet, apparently, so he sent it to me by email. I should say, just to give a bit of warning, after this I'm going to hand the microphone down to that end so it can come back this way. So the question from Professor Peters is, he says there are very few space companies and virtually no space agencies that have a CSR unit, unlike many industrial companies, which you've identified very well. Does the panel think that the reason is that there is less emphasis by space companies on CSR compared to the companies you've discussed about is because they don't have to work directly with consumers, what he calls B2C, business to consumer marketing?
Okay, so just to clarify, so the question is behind the reasoning of the emphasis of CSR in more terrestrial applications and not space companies, and the reasoning for, okay. So I think Sergey and maybe Josh together, you could perhaps give an overarching answer.
Yes, we're already working about it. Also, few companies were trying to improve the Internet of Things and deploy it on few companies. How it was mentioned, they started to do it maybe nearly 4 years ago. And maybe in future it will be more wild, spread. It's really interesting. We're working it by every day. And but one of them company, just a second, if I can remember, no, sorry. Okay, yeah, and now I think the main thing that we're trying to improve right now is Internet of Things, and it maybe in the future it will be well spread.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, just to add to that, pardon me. Yes, to add to what Sergey says, primarily when we were looking at the CSR practices, we definitely agree with Professor Peters. There aren't really CSR policies for space companies, and I think generally that is because of the follow-on comment that they don't directly really interact with the public. Also, generally speaking, when there are failures, they're obviously tragic and they're costly, but they don't have the same sort of public reaction, I think, a lot of the time. And a great deal of the reasoning behind having a CSR policy a lot of the time is to sort of normalize relationships with the public. And when something like an oil spill happens, and millions of gallons of oil are spread on the surface of the ocean, and animals are affected, and numerous people's livelihoods are affected, it hits much closer to home than when a Falcon 9 explodes in the launch pad and destroys Inmarsat satellite. There's not a lot of, that's more of like an investor relations issue rather than like actually trying to relate directly to the public.
Well, thank you. Another great presentation. And Jenna, you should reconsider your job opportunities.
Thanks. I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but there you go.
One thing I was missing, though, were a commercial break, but okay.
We thought about it.
Yeah, we did.
Cooking with Yoast.
Maybe a little bit playing devil's advocate, but some of what you brought forward looks to me like you put a patch on a problem that is not related to your industry. So giving some money to a local community or giving some telemedicine assets to a local community that may, divert attention from the real problems that the industry may have in a certain community. Is that only a something that I view, or is there something behind it? Did you evaluate why is all of a sudden an oil company investing into non-oil company related medical care, infrastructure, etc., instead of investing the money in R&D to utilize new innovative technologies or space assets?
Okay, so your question is the allocation of assets perhaps on a more long-term basis as opposed to a short-term to patch up solutions. Am I getting that right?
Well, no.
Is it?
It is. Why is an oil company building a childcare facility and not investing the money for something that is more directly linked to their problems they have to cover?
Okay, that they have caused. So, say, the communities.
The reason why we think that they invest in communities or aid communities is because investors do invest in these companies, and some investors have the view, or some investors are very environmental focused, and they may be pulling out of that sector. So I think this is one of the reasons why they do it. It supports them. It facilitates them in order to gain investment, and at the same time prove that they're helping the community, or they're helping the society, rather than just generating oil and producing chaos at times.
If I may, I would like to quickly add something. We're trying not just to give job to people, we're also trying to make them often routine life better. That's why it's our proposal.
Next question.
Many thanks, TP TerraSpace, for this spirited presentation with very interesting content. And by the way, you have really come a long way since the rehearsal of a few days ago. Do you remember that?
Yeah, we did. Thank you.
You've done very well. I've got two questions. One is rather focused and the other is general. The focus question is, you remember, of course, the very significant BP oil spill of a few years ago. It was in, I think, Louisiana. Is that correct?
Yeah, 2000.
That part of the US. In your opinion, was this a major game changer in terms of the way oil and gas companies react to disasters, because they made a complete mess of the way that they reacted? The general question is, what contact, if any, have you had with oil and gas companies in the context of your TP research?
Okay, so the first question, the focus one, is whether we think the BP oil spill was, like you said, a game changer. It made a significant change in how oil and gas companies approach this kind of issue. I think Sid talked about it, so sorry to keep directing him to you, but if he could answer the first one.
Yes, to a certain extent, but then there are other companies like Saudi Aramco, who have actually been doing quite a lot in terms of CSR well before that, which is establishing schools, and they've been doing it for a very long time. But then yes, to answer the question in short, I think there is a more emphasis on CSR after the oil spill, after the specific oil spill. Thank you.
And for the second one, the contact we had as a project, I'll ask Josh to answer that.
Yeah, sure. Actually, we were very fortunate. Bethany's uncle, I believe, works on an oil platform for ExxonMobil, just off the coast of Newfoundland, if I'm not mistaken. And so in each of our sub-teams, we came up with a list of questions about this sort of CSR policies for our three main focal areas and sent them off to him, and he was kind enough to reply from the perspective of an ExxonMobil employee who's actually working in the field on an oil rig. So we are very fortunate.
So what is his perspective? Is he an engineer? Is he a manager? What's his?
I don't recall a specific position.
Okay.
Can you repeat that?
Okay, so that's very relevant. Yep.
For those who didn't hear, he's a communications engineer working on the oil platform.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your original presentation. I really enjoyed. So I have one question. It's linked to the environmental management. You mentioned that the companies need to consider local in situ data at the same time when they obtain the satellite data. Did you think that drones can help? And then how drones can improve environmental protection?
Okay, so yeah, it's an environmental question based about the inclusion of drones to do with the data already utilized by satellites and in situ. So I think it'll be a combination of Pablo from the environmental side and Nico from the technology side.
Okay, yeah, so one of the main problems that I mentioned before also was that it's really hard to detect some emissions, especially when they're starting a leak, for example, in the oil and gas industry. So in this case, because satellites are quite far and the resolution is not that perfect, the drones will actually help a lot to actually check in the pipeline route and where the leak is coming from, so that like the detection can be done easier with that. Although I see that it will also need a lot of investment, because like getting the drones all over the pipeline will need like to fly all over around to actually look for the information. So there's a trade-off that should be considered, whether like the drones can be like assessed into this, or maybe only like increasing the resolution for satellites can actually get better images of the whole pipeline route.
Yeah, and just to complement, my answer goes the same way as Pablo's. I mean, as I said during the presentation, the actual spatial resolution doesn't really allow to detect such leaks, spills. So until we have further development in those technologies, in those areas, a combination of both, I think, would be really beneficial for the environment in general and for the company's operations. So yeah, I would consider drones helping in that process.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Okay, well, Team TerraSpace, congratulations on a fantastic presentation, not only to the people that you see in front of you, but also to everyone who's behind the scenes. I know you guys have worked tirelessly over many, many weeks with scripts going backwards and forwards and many, many practices of this. I have to say, I think it came together rather well. There was a very complex presentation with many changes, which was handled very well. I do have one question, okay, apart from that. Okay, imagine that I'm an executive of an oil and gas company. I have a budget allocated to CSR, and I wanted to invest in space. What would your recommendation be to me? What's the one thing I could do? Because some of your recommendations are quite, I wouldn't say vague, but they're going to happen anyway. So the constellations, the mega constellations, they're going to happen, and it's a question of being able to take advantage of that. So if I wanted to spend my CSR money, how would I do that?
Okay, so yeah, your question's focusing on the primary investment that as a one-off you could give, right? So I'd hand it to Nico.
Well, one of the, the main considerations of such companies are, their operations are quite risky, okay, and I think it came across a lot in the presentation that health and safety is reconsidered. So in regards to that, I would try to direct those investments towards protecting workers. So by doing this, you also you are bettering the image of your company, and you encourage people to work for you and to be better for your company. So and I would suggest in the Internet of Things is a really interesting concept, and such as collecting data from machineries, and because those machineries could be really dangerous. So the more data you have on them, the better, and the Internet of Things can provide a solution to that. And as well as for the environmental aspect of it, in better optical imagery to monitor your pipelines for leaks and illegal tapping, and yeah, those I would recommend.
Okay, I mean, I can kind of see where you're going with that, but specifically, the Internet of Things is not a space technology. That's a very terrestrial technology. So what would the space investment be?
Okay, I wanted to add something to Nico's question first, and then as I said a little bit. Well, what we were thinking also here after the results we obtained from the team project was to have an impact of all the space technologies and how they will actually affect the CSR policies of oil and gas industry. So, for example, we had a lot of suggestions regarding the spin-offs and so on that also come from the space sector, and we saw that most of them actually could have a better outreach from the space sector. So, like, I think it's lacking a little bit of this kind of publicity from the space agencies, like pretty much from main space agencies, that they have these technologies, but like they don't consider these uses primarily for the oil and gas industry, let's say. They can use it for several other applications. So there's a little bit of lacking in there, and like the in-depth for these companies to actually get in touch with the space agencies and see if there's technology available to solve one of the problems would also like help them.
Okay, just one final thought, just tweaking this a little bit. When people spend money on CSR, do they ever spend money on new technologies, or is it more building schools and so on? So would this be perhaps not an appropriate way to spend CSR money?
If I may, I would like to add. Yes, you know, it's not just to provide better conditions for human being. It's also how to improve technologies. As I mentioned, that it's really important accessibility of information for public. You know, if you would say, for example, we reduce this type of emissions, and it will be much more beneficial when we will just be make one school in one country or something like it, and it would be provide us a public trust, and you know, it's really important for us.
I think the overarching concept is that CSR, in one of the main reasons people do CSR is for the exterior show, almost. They want to attract socially minded investors, they want to give a good public image. So things like building schools automatically does that more than investing in satellite technology, for example. You see it a lot more. The news broadcast it a lot more. So I think putting all of that together, whilst the Internet of Things is definitely, these other technologies related to space are definitely interesting from an exterior point of view, it's a lot more attractive to build a school and build roads and all that kind of thing. So I think, yeah, in summary, I think that's what Sergey's, just to build on his point.
And also, it's better, you know, to forecast what may be happened, that, you know, to see a real impact which will be in the future.
Okay, Mike's back with me again. First of all, a comment about the Internet of Things. I was at the Space Forum conference in Luxembourg last week, which is a kind of mixture of space and IT, and there were a number of presentations on space and the Internet of Things. So that is clearly an up-and-coming field. And it's fortunate to note that at this summer's Space Studies program, ISU will have a team project on space and the Internet of Things. So we should certainly refer your report to them for reading ahead of that. I had a question, and it may come back to, I think, something maybe Josh said at the beginning, but I was still kind of focusing in on the presentation. I mean, we heard a lot in the last presentation about legal questions and the variability of the legalization of drones internationally. In terms of CSR, what's the sort of situation with national, international legislation benchmarking minimum standards?
So the interesting thing about CSR is that it isn't really well monitored or legislated for. Essentially, it's an activity that companies take upon themselves to simply make, or to help their public image and to make them more attractive to investors. So there isn't really any sort of legal framework in place for mandatory CSR requirements. So like some things sort of seem like they're reflected in that. Like environmental management is a good example of this. Like when BP had their massive oil spill, they were legally required to clean it up. It wasn't sort of out of the kindness of their hearts that they did that. So there are a lot of things that are similar in the realm of that are reflected in legal issues, but specifically CSR isn't mandatory. So that's another reason why some companies, like space ones, don't have it, because they don't really need to have, there's no legislation in place for them to have that. I guess the reason why so many companies do have it is primarily for public image, and also because a lot of companies have competitors who have CSR practices. And if they're appearing more successful or friendly to the community, let's say, then it would also be in their best interests to mimic similar policies to sort of raise their level of raise their level of trust with the community. So yes, does that more or less answer your question? There really isn't a legal framework in place.
Yeah, and I guess by extension, is there a, from the CSR community, maybe then, is there a sort of standard of best practice? Is there an international CSR association?
Don't believe so. There are, for like a blanket CSR governing body for internationally, there are the two monitoring or evaluation criteria that I mentioned at the beginning, the triple bottom line and the Global Research Initiative or Institute methods for tracking CSR activities. Those are put forward to help companies evaluate the success of their CSR, but they aren't mandatory to do. And so it's entirely driven internally. So if Shell wants to use these reporting or these monitoring methodologies, they can evaluate their CSR practices with them, but no one is telling them to do so. It's just sort of they've become the global standards for CSR effectiveness evaluation. There are a couple of other systems as well, but they aren't used nearly as frequently as the triple bottom line and GRI methods. So that's kind of the...
Okay, and just seeking a kind of another way to try and bring it back to space. There's the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, and they have an interest in obviously the UN sustainable development initiatives. Are those, do you know? I mean, it's fine if you don't. I'm just curious. Are those reflected in these two CSR measurement techniques?
Personally, I don't know. Do any of you know? No, I don't think we really looked into that at all.
Okay, no, it would be interesting to see. Okay, and then I have a question from Steve Brody, which has come in over email. Has the team identified good venues, conferences, or other methods to get the word out directly to oil and gas companies that could benefit from your work?
So we are presenting our work at the IAC. Bethany will be going in September to present our work there, albeit that is a space forum and not really a forum.
Not many oil companies.
Not many oil and gas companies at the IAC. So far we haven't looked into any specific oil and gas skewed conferences or venues, but that is definitely something that would be worth considering for the future.
Okay, I don't have any more questions. I'm just going to look around at my colleagues again to see if there's any more. If not, I will thank Team TerraSpace. I will thank also Team Dragonfly, who presented earlier, everybody here, the faculty for their questions, the audience out there on the internet, and encourage the audience to tune back later this year to the team project final presentations from the SSB, and then this time again next year for the MSS 18 team project presentations. To all the MSS 17 students, I think you can now relax. Thank you very much.
Off the front, guys.